Chapter 1743. These 7 people were, without a doubt, the most influential figures in the Lianyang Ministry of War in the past 5 years. Other than Liu Baijie, who had to resign because of the Guangling War, Jiyu Zhentang led the military and politics of the 2 Liao provinces. Chen Zhibao was given the title of King of Western Shu. They were all well-deserved promotions. Wu Zhongshuan was like the sun in the sky. Among the assistant ministers, Tang Taizhuang was the latest to enter the capital. However, compared to Xu Gong and Lu Shengxiang, who were at the top of the city walls, he was more of a late bloomer. Everyone in the court gradually viewed Tang Taizhuang as the best candidate for the next Minister of War. It was clear that Xu Gong had lost a lot of people's hearts when he led his troops south to stop the Beiliang cavalry. At this time, there was a large group of people galloping out of Wutong town. There was no lack of high-spirited young people sitting high on their horses. Guo Dongfeng lay lazily on the arrow mound and looked at their figures. He twisted his mouth and his face was full of disdain. Xu Gong stood beside Lu Shengxiang and smiled. It seems that the king of Jing'an is quite popular. Lu Shengxiang smiled playfully and said, "Who in the world doesn't know that the king of Jing'an is loyal to the court? Everyone says that he is the role model of the vassal kings. In the past 4 to 5 years, the court had not given him the title of king. Among the vassal kings, Hsu Fengnian of Beiliang was famous for being a playboy. Zhao Zhu of Nanjiang was famous for his bravery. Zhao Yu of Guangling was known for his ruthlessness. Zhao Yi of Liaodong was relatively unknown. At that time, Zhao Zun was only a little famous in the literary circles of Jiangzhou, but no one thought that he could inherit the title of vassal king. No one thought that in a short 2 to 3 years, he would first shake the capital with his 13 strategies. Then, he would save the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying and fight to the death. He was praised for being both intelligent and brave. The group of young nobles who followed General Yang Qiong to Wutong town probably came because they admired their peer, the king of Jing and Guo Dongfeng. What's the saying? Guo Dongfeng, who suddenly heard Lu Shengxiang's question, was stunned for a moment. He was at a loss. Xu Gong softly said, "Along the way to the south, I have indeed heard of the saying, the northwest has Shu, Chu, and Song. It's a pity that our central plains has Zun." Guo Dongfeng, who heard this for the first time, flew into a rage. He is just a suicidal vassal king who knows nothing about military affairs. How can he deserve to be called Zhongyuan Yuan Zun? That guy surnamed Shu at least blocked the iron hooves of Beimang's million-strong army. I, Guo Dongfeng, am somewhat convinced. As for that Song Marolin, who is brilliant in literary talent, is only famous for his beauty. I, Guo Dongfeng, disdain to compare myself with him. But who is this Zhao Zun? There were no soldiers near the city wall where the 3 of them were standing, so Guo Dongfeng's arrogant words did not matter. Xu Gong smiled faintly. What a pity. Almost at the same time, Lu Shengxiang said, "What are my central plains?" The 2 famous generals who had been friends for a long time and met for the first time in the small town looked at each other and smiled. Not long after, the king of Jing'an, Zhao Zun, dressed in the official robes of a vassal king, withdrew from the Guangling River Navy and headed north. He only brought a small group of elite riders to Wutong town. Next to him were the children of the eunuchs in Jing who had come out of the city on their own to welcome him. After they met, Zhao Zun was gentle and courteous. All of them felt regret that they had not met sooner. The large group of people and horses surged into the small town. When Zhao Zun saw the 2 people on the city wall, he quickly smiled and cupped his fists in greeting. Xu Gong and Lu Shengxiang also cupped their fists in greeting. Zhao Zun did not feel that the 2 generals of Liyang, who had been assistant ministers of the Ministry of War, were lacking in manners. However, the group of young people who had been able to call the wind and summon the rain in Greaton City when they were young felt injustice for the king of Jing'an. They felt that Lu and Shu were only people of high status but little power and should not be so restrained. Not to mention coming out of the city to welcome him, at the very least, they should have come down the city wall to greet this vassal king. However, something that made these people even angrier appeared. On the street, 3 riders suddenly appeared. Facing their cavalry army, almost all of whom were of noble status, they were not willing to give way. If not for the king of Jing'an and Zhao Zun taking the lead to give way, the two sides would have collided. The domineering three riders directly exited the city in the middle of the road and did not even look at the people. When someone was about to get angry, someone would quickly remind them in a small voice and then everything would be calm. The three riders of Shishu were Che Yi, Dian Xiongzhao, and Wei Fucheng. Dian Xiongzhao and Wei Fucheng had been the four fangs of Beiliang outside the Northwest Pass. Later on, the two of them followed Chen Zhibao into Shu without bringing a single soldier. This was like thunder in the ears of the Liyang court. Shu Gong looked at the backs of the three riders with a calm expression. In reality, if it were not for the 20,000 Shu soldiers retreating at the last minute, the Beiliang cavalry would not have been able to enter Guangling Road so easily. However, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, who had lost the support of the people in court because of this, did not seem to hold a grudge. Lu Shengxiong calmly glanced at Shu Gong. About 15 minutes later, the three riders exiting the city turned into four riders entering the city. The leading rider was a man dressed in white. He held a long spear at an angle and was as handsome as a god. Lu Shengxiong and Shu Gong moved their feet at the same time. They no longer stood in their original position and looked down. After walking down the city wall, the two of them stood near the inconspicuous city wall. The four riders did not stop, but the man in white nodded slightly at the two of them. Guo Dongfeng's eyes were burning as he muttered, "I will be like this in the future." The two great generals of the court, who did not feel that they had been neglected, quietly watched the four riders leave. Moreover, at this time, the small Wutong town was filled with dragons crossing the river. There were many eyes and eyes. If the two assistant ministers, who were not successful on the battlefield and had lost their official career, stayed together, it could be explained as human nature to stick together for warmth. However, if they were to interact with the feudal lords who held authority at the border, then they would be asking for trouble. However, toward this person called Chen Zhibao, whether it was Lu Shengxiong, who had long been famous throughout the spring and autumn period, or Shu Gong, who had risen to prominence in the Liang army, they both felt a sense of admiration and longing from the bottom of their hearts. No matter how high the civil officials in the Liang imperial court would be in the future, or how low the military generals would be in the future, in their hearts, Chen Zhibao would always be a romantic figure worthy of mutual admiration. Logically speaking, on the battlefield, there would only be piles of corpses, and there would never be romantic affairs. However, Chen Zhibao was undoubtedly the only master of the art of war after Yi Baikui's death who could command troops like a deity. So much so that the two emperors of Liang were willing to see him as the country's barrier. The previous emperor, Zhao Dun, even wished that Chen Zhibao could become the spring lake and stone mountain in his Zhao family's backyard. Not only could it be pleasing to the eye, it could also set the feng shui. Shu Gong and Lu Shengxiong stood in the shadows of the city wall. Shu Gong laughed in a low voice and said, "I think that General Lu need not worry about temporary gains and losses. General Lu's wind rises outside the Great Wall, not in Guangling, and certainly not in the capital." Lu Shengxiong smiled but did not speak. Shu Gong took the lead and left. Guo Dongfeng was surprised to find that the commanding general, Lu Shengxiong, had a faint murderous aura. Guo Dongfeng looked at the somewhat unfamiliar Great General Pro Yi and began to feel uneasy. Lu Shengxiong took a deep breath and sneered, "You are indeed worthy of being called Shu Longxiang. It seems that in the future, the person who will compete with me for the number one military merit in the expansion of the border will be none other than you." Guo Dongfeng was baffled. For the first time, he restrained his curiosity and did not dare to ask half a question. Lu Shengxiong exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and slowly walked forward. He only felt some murderous aura toward Shu Gong, who had seen through his scheme, but toward Cao Changqing, who had changed his mind at the last moment, he was extremely angry. In Lu Shengxiong's view, if Cao Changqing followed the previous arrangement and deployed troops, then Jiyu Zhentang would be the new dynasty's Xu Xiao. And as long as he took the initiative to open the door when the West Chu army moved north, then he would be the new dynasty's Jiyu Zhentang. Regardless of whether the new dynasty's surname was Zhao or Jiang or any other surname, Lu Shengxiong only knew that at that time, in the imperial court, there would no longer be people like Yang Qiong lying on the merit book, and there would no longer be vassals with the surname of Zhao in the local area. Xie Shi, Pei Sui, and the others were still young, and had the natural flaw of not being familiar with the geography of the north. Once the vast territory of Beimang became a place to deploy troops, then it meant that countless military merits would be easily obtained. It would not be like the Battle of Guangling, where it was like a snail's shell, and there was no need to pay attention to the old powers with intertwined roots. As long as he, Lu Shengxiong, succeeded in supporting the dragon, he would be able to jump below Jiyu Jiantang. Later on, he might be able to rely on a series of battles in Beimang to rise above him. But Cao Changqing's inexplicable self-destruction and Lu Shengxiong's forbearance before and after the Battle of Yulu Pass would become the best evidence that he would be attacked as mediocre in the future. Lu Shengxiong's face was gloomy. He muttered to himself, "Cao Changqing, you deserve to die." On the official road outside the town, dust was flying everywhere. It was particularly spectacular. If it wasn't a cavalry of more than 1,000 riders, it wouldn't have such momentum. On a carriage, because of the bumpy road, the shoulders of the 3 men and women in the carriage rose and fell. The young woman's face was beautiful, and her figure was tall and well-proportioned. She was obviously not a southerner. A long sword hung from her waist. She was full of heroic spirit and had a knight-errant spirit. The young man was sloppy, and at this moment, he was flattering the last person. "Teacher, you don't know how rude and unreasonable Tang He and Li Chunyu are. Back then, I didn't even dare to go near Wu Zhongshuan, who betrayed the southern border. I really didn't even dare to let out a fart. I was extremely aggrieved. This time, it was thanks to teacher that I had the courage to go to Wutong town. The person who was called Sir was extraordinarily handsome. It was hard to tell if he was male or female. What was romantic? He was romantic. Naylan Yusi. He glanced at His Royal Highness Zhao Zhu from the corner of his eyes. Wu Zhongshuan is not a good thing. You borrowed a few thousand riders from him and didn't return them. Is that a good thing? Zhao Zhu smiled mischievously and said, "Sir is right. You scolded him well." Naylan Yusi pointed at His Royal Highness, who was now infamous. His eyes looked at the woman surnamed Zhong. He teased, "Zhong Gaoxia, Zhong Gaoxia. You are blind to fall for this idiot and coward." Zhong Gaoxia, the daughter of the blue-eyed Zhong Julu. She dismissed it with a smile. Although Zhao Zhu was thick-skinned, he still blushed with shame when Naylan Yusi called him an idiot and a coward in front of Zhong Gaoxia. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and poked his head out. He could already see the low city walls of Wutong town. Nearby were southern borders Great General Zhong Dingyuan and his men, as well as Forest Crow and Gong Bank, Wang Xianji's 2 disciples. Naylan Yusi closed his eyes. He put his hands on his knees and gently patted them. Chapter 1744. Zhao Zhu retracted his head and asked curiously, "Sir, why do you want me to come to this town this time?" "To tell the truth, I loathe and fear Wu Zhongshuan. I also don't like Shu Gong and Lu Shengxiang. That mad dog Yuan Tingshan is even more disgusting to look at. As for Prince Jinggan, Zhao Zun, I used to loathe him, but now, I actually don't like him." Naylan Yusi sneered, "Of course you're okay with them. There are so many heroes in this small Wutong town. You can only wrestle with this king of vassal." Zhao Zhu was resentful. Zhong Gaoxia raised the corner of his mouth. Naylan Yusi stopped smiling and said in a deep voice, "I have 4 things to do here this time. Scold Wu Zhongshuan, invite Shu Gong to a banquet, meet Lu Shengxiang secretly, and test Chen Jibao." Zhao Zhu asked in a low voice, "Did I really jinx it? Did I say that Lu Shengxiang really has ambitions?" Naylan Yusi shook his head and said, "It's hard to be sure before we meet. As for after we meet, it doesn't matter if Lu Shengxiang has ambitions." Zhao Zhu sighed and said, "Well, anyway, I can't get involved in these big things. I don't want to add fuel to the fire. I have to trouble you." Naylan Yusi suddenly asked, "Zhao Zhu, let me ask you something. If you ascend the throne in the future, assuming that Beimang is unable to invade the Central Plains, and HSU Fengnian still has the Northwest Army in his hands, what will you do?" Zhao Zhu was stunned. When he was about to blurt out the words, Naylan Yusi, who was smiling, suddenly looked cold. He shouted, "Zhao Zhu, think about it carefully first." After Zhao Zhu was shocked, he raised a bright smile. The old emperor of Liang, Zhao Li, and Xiaonian's father call each other brothers. It's different from me and Xiaonian calling each other brothers. Nalan Yusi sneered. Where are you sitting at this time? Zhao Zhu didn't know how to answer. He couldn't say that he was sitting in the carriage. Mr. Nalan was asking the obvious. Nalan Yusi's eyes were deep. He didn't answer his own question. Instead, he asked another question. Where did you sit in the past? Did you think that Zhao Li had the intention to kill Xu Xiao from the very beginning? He wanted to kill Xu Xiao, and his son, Zhao Dun, wanted to kill Zhong Gaoxia's father. Were these the true intentions of the father and son? Isn't it because of one's position and politics? Isn't it because one has to face the general trend behind that chair? Zhao Zhu, who had never thought about these problems, paled slightly. He was in pain and unease. Nalan Yusi lowered his eyes. Huang Sanjia unwillingly chose you, Zhao Zhu, before he died. He gave all his accumulated wealth to me, Nalan Yusi. Now Jiang feuding is on Wu Zhongshuan's side. Although Wang Tongshan, the idiot who thinks he is smart, died early, Wu Zhongshuan, a fence-sitter, is not worth mentioning. Even if he is wary of Jiang feuding, it is easy for me to kill him. If you feel bored, you might as well guess which one of Tang He, Li Chunyu, and the others is the real spy. Zhao Zhu, if a person doesn't think about the future, there will be immediate worries. Now that the wind has risen, there will definitely be people who will soar to the top, and there will definitely be people who will fall from the top. You already have half the destiny. Other than Chen Zhibao, who is shrewd and tries to accumulate power before acting, you are actually invincible. Therefore, there are some things that you should think about carefully. The family assets that Zhao Bing left for you, such as Zhong Dingyuan, Ji Yu Ying, Yi Shoufeng, and Liang Yu, as well as those aides who are unwilling to stay in a corner of the southern border, you have to think about who is Wu Zhongshuan's man and who is the imperial court's man. Who will follow you to the central plains and gain power, and who will take the opportunity to wantonly start a war between the north and the south? Who would be Zhao Zhu's Zhong Julu? Of course, the most important thing is who will ask you to kill Hsu Fengnian in the future, or who will ask you to kill me, Nalan Yusi. Zhao Zhu said in a trembling voice, Sir, Zhao Zhu doesn't know. I don't know. Zhao Zhu held his head with both hands, as if he didn't dare to think about those questions. Grand hegemony was the most difficult to think about. Zhong Gaoxia's eyes were sad. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gently held his arm. Nalan Yusi was expressionless, and his eyes were complicated. It was unknown whether it was pity or sarcasm. His eyes instantly became dull, and he said in a mischievous tone, I have long been annoyed by your sloppy attitude. How is it? Have you suffered? Zhao Zhu raised his head and held Zhong Gaoxia's hand tightly. At the same time, he looked at Mr. Nalan, the only remaining strategist after Li Yishan, Huang Longsha, and Yuan Bengxi died one after another. He looked at Mr. Nalan, the king behind the scenes of Nanjiang. Zhao Zhu suddenly changed his sitting position to a kneeling position. He faced Nalan Yusi and slowly bowed his head. Zhao Zhu knows that what Sir wants is different from any other strategist. Zhao Zhu only wants Sir to be my Yuan Bengxi. If Zhao Zhu really sits on the dragon chair and wears the dragon robe one day, I can promise Sir that I will kill anyone who dares to kill Sir. If Zhao Zhu dies before Sir, when I die, I will ask Sir to choose a minister on my sickbed and let Sir choose a minister. Zhao Zhu will not let his descendant be the current emperor, Zhao Zhuan. Nalan Yusi laughed, but he never spoke. Zhao Zhu was sweating, but he was relieved. He intuitively found that Nalan Yusi might not be satisfied with his words, and it might not be what he really wanted, but this Mr. Nalan was somewhat happy. Chapter 1745. Nalan Yusi closed his eyes to rest and smiled faintly. He didn't care about the embarrassment and heaviness of His Royal Highness of King Yang at all. Nalan Yusi suddenly whispered, if you feel stuffy in the carriage, you can go out. Zhao Zhu hurriedly got up and left with Zhong Gaoxia, who was wearing a hat. Yishan, back then, the two of us heard Huang Longsha say that thousands of years later, many scholars at that time would not only be able to calmly sit on equal footing with emperors, kings, generals, and ministers, they would even lose their backbone in front of officials as small as sesame seeds and mung beans. They would truly regard officials as their parents. I laughed. You were angry. You used 20 years to teach your closed-door disciple to be a hero instead of a mighty lord. In the end, you died just like that, and your ashes were scattered outside the Northwest Pass. You laughed. I was angry. I could guess Huang Longsha's selfishness. He, Huang Sanjia, calculated people's hearts. There was a paladin who made him lose once. He felt that he could turn the tables after his death. He firmly believed that Zhao Zhu and Hsu Fengnian would turn against each other. Then I, Naylan Yusi, will make you and Huang Longsha lose once. Naylan Yusi opened his eyes and looked up at the top of the carriage. He softly hummed a song from his hometown. There was a young man who went to the mountains with a broken book box. There was a little girl who came from the mountains with the fragrance of orchids. Naylan Yusi lifted the curtain, and the spring breeze brushed his face. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the northeast. Cao Changqing, you and I are bitter, but you are still luckier than me. Naylan Yusi suddenly put down the curtain and suddenly reached out to cover his mouth. After spreading out his palm, he looked down at his bloody hand and muttered to himself, "But we are all young men." Outside the southern gate of Liang capital, the wide official road that connected to the Imperial Road in the city had been empty since 4 hours ago. The whole city was waiting for one person. Waiting for one person to attack the city. The city was full of iron armor. On this day, the elites of the 4 armies of the capital were all gathered here. Facing that green-robed man, they were still facing a great enemy. There was a green-robed Confucian who was walking slowly on the official road less than half a li away from the capital. He was alone, holding a go box in his hand. He stopped and sat down. He didn't face the number 1 city in the north. Instead, he sat cross-legged with his back to the east. The black box contained the white stones, and the white box contained the black stones. He placed the 2 boxes of old court objects that he had found in West Chu's chessboard waiting for the imperial edict in front of him. They were separated by a chessboard, and the boxes were already open. Thinking back to those days, the state preceptor Limi once said after getting drunk, "There is only one outstanding rock in the world, and I, Da Chu, alone have 8 parts, and Cao Dei alone has 8 part. How could such a person not be proud of himself?" He sat upright and still, with 2 fingers together, reaching out to the go box in front of him, but he didn't play a go piece. He just smiled and looked across, as if someone was playing go with him. The green-robed Confucian scholar with white sideburns had a gentle look in his eyes as he said softly, "You go first, Black." The clear sky that had been clear for thousands of miles immediately turned into a storm. Apparitions appeared in the sky above Great Peace City. As the 4 words left the mouth of this Confucian scholar, a black stone jumped out of the snow-white go box slightly further away. It drew out an ethereal trajectory and lightly landed in the center of the invisible chessboard. First move was Qianyuan. A very unreasonable first move. But an even more unreasonable scene was that a brilliant pillar of light came down from the sky above Great Peace City and landed on the ground. An earthquake that hadn't occurred in 100 years seemed to occur in a grand city. The world shook. Countless tiles on the eaves of all the halls and pavilions, including the Martial Hall of Great Peace City, started to move. The green-robed Confucian scholar picked up the glowing white go piece with 2 fingers. His eyes were full of mirth as he lightly placed it on the chessboard. At the same time, the second pillar of light came as expected. Great Peace City shook again. There were tens of thousands of Liyang armor in front of the city, but it was still that person who attacked the city first. All the arqueballistae on the city walls finally fired in unison. There seemed to be wind and thunder in the air. The middle-aged Confucian scholar completely ignored it. The second black go piece jumped out of the go box and landed on the chessboard. After the go piece took root, it floated silently and motionlessly. Inside the city, the decorations on the eaves of the Martial Hall, immortals, dragons, phoenixes, lions, fish, xiezhi, bullfighting, and others all turned to dust. Outside the city, almost 100 enormous arrows that were as majestic as the flying swords of sword immortals shattered in the air. The green-robed Confucian scholar picked up the second white go piece. Before he placed the go piece, he said softly, "I hate that I became a Confucian saint too late. I hate that I became domineering too late. He put 2 fingers together and landed heavily on the chessboard. There was a clanging sound. Great Peace City shook for the 4th time. This time, the commotion was the most intense. The war horses that became the mounts of many cavalrymen outside the city had their legs broken and knelt on the ground. On the towering city walls, there were finally many people who could not control themselves. They either flew off the walls on their swords, leapt over, or rushed over. Another pair of black and white go pieces landed on the chessboard. The green-robed Confucian scholar did not seem to dare to look at the player opposite him. He looked down at the chessboard. I, Cao Changqing, am distinguished. As you have seen, I am distinguished. When the 4th white go piece jumped out of the go box and slowly landed, the people who had come out of the city were less than 30 steps away from Cao Changqing. Cao Changqing picked up the go piece. This time, he did not place the go piece from high to low, but casually swept it across and landed on the chessboard at a slight angle. There was a great energy that swept across. The martial grandmasters guarding the capital were all hit and flew backwards, smashing into the walls of Great Peace City. In the spring breeze of the 3rd year of the auspicious talisman, West Chu waited for the go order and placed the go piece on Great Peace City. Chapter 1746. On top of the city wall in the south of Great Peace City, an old man and a young girl stood out among the clanging armor. The old man was dressed in linen and carried a long sword on his back. He looked like a normal swordsman. The young girl was in the prime of her life. Not only did she carry a sword on her back, but she also had 2 swords on her waist. She was even holding a sword in her hand. Therefore, she did not look like a swordswoman, but more like a little girl selling swords on the street. The 2 were Chai Qingshan, the current leader of Dongyu Sword Pool, and Shan Yi, who had been given a book of Qingshui Pavilion sword practice by the young lord in Escape Summer Town. Previously, several people had left the city aggressively, but in the end, they were sent flying back into the city. Their corpses were embedded in the city wall, just like flies and mosquitoes that had been smashed into pieces on the window. The miserable scene made many of the Liang military officers on the city wall shudder with fear and trepidation. They subconsciously glanced at the master and disciple of Sword Pool, who had a large age gap, and finally regained some courage with great difficulty. The young girl's face was a little pale. It was not that her body was not as strong as ordinary soldiers, but that after reaching a high level in martial arts, her perception of the qi between heaven and earth was different from ordinary people. It was like an ordinary person looking at the rolling river. They only felt that it was magnificent, but qi cultivators could see the signs of the flow of qi in the world. Her master, Chai Qingshan, was a well-deserved grandmaster of the sword. Since he had chosen her as his closed-door disciple, it was natural that he had taken a fancy to her outstanding talent. When he was chatting with the old master of Wu family's sword tomb, he was quite conceited and said that his female disciple's talent in the sword was second only to Jiang Sai, the empress of West Chu. The young girl, whose name sounded like 321, only felt that she was standing on top of the city wall of Martial Emperor and would be smashed to death in the next moment. She clenched her teeth and held the long sword tightly. Her delicate body was on the verge of collapse. Only when Chai Qingshan reached out a hand to support the ancient sword young phoenix on her back did the young girl feel relieved. She took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "Master, what is Great Official Cao trying to do? Does he really want to break into the capital by himself? Will he only stop when he kills his way into the palace for the 5th time?" Chai Qingshan, who had traveled extensively with the young girl in recent years, shook his head and said, "Master doesn't know why Cao Changqing changed from the Confucian way to the hegemonic way." The young girl looked at the lonely figure outside the city and felt inexplicably sorrowful. It was rumored that he had once served as a high-ranking official in West Chu and was waiting for the imperial decree. He had feelings for the Empress of West Chu, but he had never shown it his entire life. He had always adhered to the etiquette of a ruler and his minister. In the end, he had been separated by life and death, but he had never revealed his feelings. The young girl did not care if the scholar who became the Confucian sage in the ancient battlefield of West Wall was the pride of the Cao family. She did not even care about Cao Qingyi's magnificent feat of passing through the corridors of Liang Palace 3 times in her early years. She was just a little envious of the poor woman who had been scolded for 20 years. Even though she was written in various unofficial histories as an unbearable vixen and the chief culprit of the destruction of Da Chu, the young girl only thought that if she died one day, it would be nice to have such an infatuated person still thinking about her after death. Thinking of this, the young girl sighed softly. She raised her arm and patted her chest with the body of the incomplete new sword white python. There, separated by the thinning clothes of spring, was a yellowed script green water pavilion. That was probably where her heart was at ease. It was also the reason why this was the first time she had truly practiced the sword seriously after leaving Beiliang. That young man was tall and slender, so when he spoke to her in the summer town at the foot of Wudong Mountain, he had to lower his head. Although his smile was warm, he only thought of her as an innocent Jianghu girl, a Jianghu junior who did not care if they would meet again after brushing past each other. She did not like this. As Cao Changqing once again placed a piece on the chessboard, a rainbow light as thick as the pillar of the Hall of Martial Heroes rapidly descended from the sky. Great Peace City shuddered again. Chai Qingshan did not look at the magnificent pillar of light descending from the city behind him. He sighed emotionally. Us swordsmen, from ancient times until now, have tirelessly pursued the great realms of Qi, rushing into the Bull and reaching the rainbow. I had not thought that Cao Changqing was already able to channel the great righteousness of the world from the blue sky into the human world. Jiao Shulu's so-called mysterious celestial being is just this. What a good Cao Changqing. It is no different from adding another 10 feet to the 100-foot scroll. If there were Qi practitioners of the northern lands standing on the city walls right now, they would discover that some of Great Peace City's blue-purple Qi flowed slowly into the young girl's orifices like water. The young girl was completely unaware. Even Chai Qingshan, who had long reached the ethereal passage tiny finger profound realm, did not sense it. Different professions were like different mountains. Celestial phenomenon and land immortal were only separated by one level, but they were two completely different worlds. The young girl suddenly asked curiously, of the people of the three sects outside of pure martial arts, Buddhism's eminent monks are Vajra when they enter the first grade, Daoist immortals are profound when they enter the first grade, and Confucian immortals reach celestial phenomenon in one step. Master, you have always been vague in the past. Why do you only say that there is no difference between the three? And why is it so difficult for Confucian people to become saints? Chapter 1747. The old man hesitated for a moment, as if he did not want to reveal the secret of heaven, or as if he did not want his proud disciple to come into contact with that level too early. In the end, Chai Qingshan could not stand the girl's pitiful eyes. He said helplessly, Master, you can forget about what I'm about to say. Don't take it seriously, and don't put it in your heart. Otherwise, your sword heart will be unstable, and it will affect the way of the sword that you should be walking. Master often went to the snowfield of Mount Hui in his early years, and had many long conversations with a scholar named Shenyuan Jingcheng. He had a unique opinion on the matter of the saints of the three religions, and his words were always shocking. For example, he talked about the cliché of lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. You must have heard this saying countless times. Shenyuan Jingcheng's view on this was not quite the same. What he said was very good, and it had the merit of advising people to abandon evil and turn to good. However, at the same time, it also caused a lot of harm to people. One must know that to become a Buddha, one could only rely on gradual ascetic practice, and it required hard work. Just like the saying, the writings of the heavens are miraculous. This saying was naturally very reasonable, but to many others, it was very unreasonable. Shenyuan Jingcheng had said that many pioneers, especially those scholars who had turned from nomads to tycoons in the past 1,000 years, all of them pursued the three immortals advocated by the saints of the Zhong family. Shenyuan Jingcheng opened up a new perspective on this, not because he disagreed with the teachings of the saints, but because he lamented that the later generations had gone astray. He gave an example of burying a child and worshipping his mother. This action was undoubtedly in line with the virtues of filial piety, and was praised by countless people. However, Shenyuan Jingcheng asserted that this person was destined to have a hard time achieving good results. If there was really an afterlife, and if there was really heaven's will in the underworld, then this person was destined to suffer the wrath of heaven and not be able to transcend. All living things in the world nurtured humans. According to common sense, an eye for an eye. Humans should repay the heavens and earth. The Taoist saints had long left behind 3,000 words to warn the later generations. Heaven and earth are not benevolent, they treat all living things as straw dogs. This was to say that the heavenly axiom was selfless, and not the so-called shallow, unbenevolent and unjust that some people mistakenly thought. Shenyuan Jingcheng very much agreed with the 4 words heaven and earth are not benevolent, but at the same time he also said that they were scholars, and it was precisely because they knew that they could not go against the will of heaven and earth that they had to go against the current, and set rules for heaven and earth so that everyone could be content with it. Therefore, using the 5 words of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and trust as a framework, it finally extended to the incomparably soul-stirring sentence, set your heart for heaven and earth, set your life for the people, inherit the lost knowledge for the past saints, and establish peace for all age. However, my disciple, think about it carefully. If there are gods in this world, do they need us to tell them what to do? Taking a step back, is the peace of the world really in accordance with the rules of the cycle of the heavenly axiom? Therefore, the truly wise people of the Confucian school, especially those who have ascended to the ranks of the Confucian saints, do not worry about themselves or their future generations. All of them have an impassioned heart, and do not hesitate to burn jade and stone with the heavenly axiom. All of them are generously going to their deaths. The young girl made no sound. After the old man finished speaking, he repeatedly sighed, and all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. Chai Qingshan smiled and asked, "Do you understand?" The young girl grinned and said confidently, "I don't understand at all." The old man could not help but laugh, and rubbed her head, "I don't need you to understand. It's good to be muddle-headed. Life lasts for 100 years, and it's easy and carefree. Otherwise, it's too tiring to live with a heart full of depression. For us swordsmen, it's enough for us to be able to cry out against injustice." Chai Qingshan said softly, "After going to Beiliang and seeing the desolate scenery of the border with your own eyes, you'll know that the carefree and happy life of the people of Jianghu is too weak to stand up to scrutiny. However, my disciple, you don't need to be so disgusted with Beiliang because you want to fight for justice. Let me tell you, if there really is a day when the Beimang army breaks through the border of the two Liao provinces, the countless people in this city who are cursing Beiliang today will also disregard their own safety and die as they wish. Even if the Beimang barbarians fight all the way to Guangling River, they won't be able to walk as if there's no one there. Instead, they'll only be flanked by the cavalry's hooves and the people of Liang who have died in battle. The people of Liang revered martial arts and chivalry. Since ancient times, there had been a saying, the scholars of the Central Plains travel north to study, while the wanderers of Liang go south to uphold justice. The latter often relied on martial prowess to violate prohibitions. This was why the countries of the Central Plains led by Da Chu had always viewed the people of Liang as uncivilized northern barbarians. However, in the past 20 years, especially after Jiyu Gentang resigned from his post as Minister of War and entered the Liao Kingdom, along with Xu Xiao's Beiliang cavalry guarding the border with Beimang, Beimang was unable to take even half a step south. The entire Central Plains was filled with singing and dancing, while the smoke in the south only reported peace and no worries. In addition, countless scholars entered Liang, and the imperial court promoted the imperial examination, opening the Dragon Gate for the poor scholars of the Shu clan. Just the Imperial College in the capital alone accommodated nearly 30,000 scholars from all over the world. Scholars flooded in like carps crossing the river, as well as the gathering of tycoons from all over the world. In a short 20 years, Tian City was no less prosperous than Da Chu's capital in the early years. The late Emperor Zhao Dun spared no effort in promoting scholars in the imperial court. At that time, other than Zhonglu and Jiyu Lu, where the two peaks faced each other, almost all of the Green Party officials in the capital were scholars. A large number of young scholars were able to enter the imperial court, and the literary Gangnam-do provided a large number of talents to the imperial court. Even the large number of remnants of West Chu, led by Sun Shiji, the Grand Preceptor of West Chu, put aside their national enmity and chose to serve Zhao Dun. In contrast, the generals in power were almost all old people without exception. The Liang imperial court, after 20 years of recuperation and following the example of their superiors and subordinates, had already displayed a pattern of having more scholars than warriors. If it were not for the restlessness of Guangling Dao and Beiliang due to West Chu's revival of the country, perhaps even Ma Zhongxian, who was a meritorious member of the Liang sect, would not have been able to become the Jidushi of Jinggan Dao in this lifetime. It was true that the current Liang sect was flourishing on the surface, and even the rebellion of West Chu had been suppressed. However, even Chai Qingshan could see that the situation was delicate. The young girl had never been interested in the general situation of the world. She pouted and said, "But I still feel that Beiliang is more pitiful." The old man smiled and said, "Master did not say that Beiliang is not worthy of your protest. I just hope that you will not be too vicious in the future and will not casually vent your anger on the innocent. Do you know why Master admires that young vassal king more and more?" Upon hearing that the young vassal king was young, the originally absent-minded girl's eyes immediately lit up. She immediately had an inexhaustible spirit, and her face was full of vigor. "Master, quickly say it. I'm listening." The old man was quite helpless. He laughed and said, "I won't say it." The old man really did not say anything. Other than being a bit angry, it was more because outside the city, Cao Changqing's chess pieces were moving faster and faster. He had no choice but to concentrate and store his momentum. Today, he, Chai Qingshan, stood here with a long sword on his back, not to enjoy the scenery. The young girl curled her lips. Knowing her master's temper, she did not ask. Chai Qingshan squinted and looked into the distance. The old man's line of sight followed the waves of arrow rain from the top of the city wall and threw it at the figure in green. There were ballistae on the top of the city wall, and there were 6,000 elite archers below the city wall. There were 2 waves of arrows covering the sky and the earth. The old man had a strange thought for no reason. If the Beiliang Shu family did not have any grievances with the Zhao family of Liang, that young vassal king would not have any complaints and would wholeheartedly be a loyal official, and the Zhao family's son would also have no doubts about him and would provide reinforcements to Beiliang. With the Central Plains as a shield, he would support the Beiliang cavalry and the 2 Liao border armies to fight against Beimang. How good would that be? If that Cao Changqing outside the city could be like Sun Shiji and many other West Chu survivors and enter the court as an official, perhaps he would be the Grand Secretary of Liang right now. In that case, there would be no need for Qi Yanglong of Shangyin Academy to come out and turn the tide. Inside, there would be Cao Changqing leading the Eternal Hui Old Spring and Xiangfu New Spring to strategize together. Outside, there would be 300,000 Beiliang cavalry and 200,000 Liao border armies. How could the world not be peaceful? Even if they gave Beimang hundreds of thousands of soldiers and armor, so what? On a small road in the northern region of the capital, a rider leisurely headed south toward Grayton City. There was a stall by the road that seemed to sell everything, including dumplings and tea and wine. A young man and woman sat there, each with their head buried in the 2 large bowls of dumplings. The rider dismounted and led the horse near the table, asking, "Can I sit?" The young man glanced at him. "Since you didn't bring a knife, you can sit." Thus, Jiyu Gentang sat on the long bench next to Hsu Fengyan and Jiang Genai. After this pillar of the country that could overturn the world sat down, he smiled and asked, "Hsu Fengyan, you treat me to a bowl of dumplings, and I help you become the emperor. Do you want to do this deal?" Chapter 1748. Jiyu Gentang's words were no less than his mind grenade. However, Hsu Fengyan was not surprised after hearing this. Without hesitation, he asked the waiter in the distance for an extra bowl of dumplings. He then asked with a smile, "A big bowl of dumplings is only 20 dumplings. The entire Liang is only 30 prefectures. 1 dumpling is worth 1 prefecture. General Jiyu, don't you think this is a big loss?" Jiyu Gentang laughed it off and did not answer. He looked like a hungry traveler waiting patiently for a bowl of thin-skinned, meaty dumplings. Hsu Fengyan had been wolfing down his food, so the ginger paste naturally ate slowly. Hsu Fengyan was the first to put down his chopsticks and exhaled contentedly. His mouth was full of the taste of cabbage. Jiyu Gentang's expression was as calm as an ancient well. He looked at the young king calmly. There was a seniority difference between the two, but in the end, there was still a difference of spring and autumn. Among the 4 famous generals of the older generation, Da Chuyi Baikue was the best at commanding troops. He had fought more than 70 battles in his life and had never lost a single one. Unfortunately, he only lost 1 battle in the end. Dongyue's consort Old Wang was the most talented in the spring and autumn. He could always turn something rotten into something magical. He was good at using surprise troops and always surprised people. He could win battles that he could not win, but he could also lose battles that he could not lose. Moreover, he lost in a way that baffled his opponents. Therefore, although he was the most talented, he had the lowest achievements. Xu Xiao's personal strategy was the weakest, but he won in his perseverance and tenacity. He fought on despite repeated defeats. No matter how defeated he was, he could always rise from the ashes. Even if he was still dead, the Xu family's military heart was still condensed. That was why he had the last laugh. Jiyu Zhentang and Qizheng were not as good as Yi Baikue and Wang Wang, but they had no shortcomings in commanding troops. Therefore, in this life, they had achieved brilliant results on the battlefield. Jiyu Zhentang entered the spring and autumn later than Xu Xiao, who left Liaodong with 800 old soldiers. In the end, he only had 2 achievements. Xu Xiao, on the other hand, had 6 achievements. Most of the military strategists and historians in the Liang imperial court did not think that Jiyu Zhentang was not as good as Xu Xiao in commanding troops. Instead, he lost because Xu Xiao early, Jiyu Zhentang late. Jiyu Zhentang can't manage at the right time. Jiyu Zhentang's life story was thought-provoking. After he stayed in the capital to serve as the Minister of War, he scattered his old troops to various places in Liang. For example, Cai Nan, Donggong, Huanggong, and the others all served as officials of the border. Although great peace cities Jiulu and Zhongjulu's Zhongjulu had a two-peak confrontation, it was always said that the blue-eyed man had the power to overturn the court. There was no such thing as Jiyu Zhentang covering the sky with one hand. And Jiyu Zhentang, as one of the top 10 martial arts masters in the past, never cared about the ranking. He also never went to Martial Emperor City to compete with Wang Shenji. As the undisputed #1 saber user in the world, he would never raise his eyebrows at a sword-using martial arts master. In the past 10 years, other than when Cao Changqing and Jiang Sai joined forces to break into Great Peace City in the first year of Xiangfu, Jiyu Zhentang used his identity as a military official of Liang to stop them with the thunder of mind. There was no news of Jiyu Zhentang initiating a fight with anyone else. In the past 20 years, Jiyu Zhentang stood tall in the imperial court of Liang. No one doubted the loyalty of this meritorious general. Not the late Emperor Zhao Dun, not the new Emperor Zhao Zhuan, not the other civil and military officials. In the eyes of Liang, this old Minister of War was not only the best candidate to resist the Beiliang cavalry, he was also the greatest backbone of Liang. The silent Jiyu Zhentang was like a family heirloom. If he did not take it out to show it to others, it meant that the family was still there and that they were still confident. Therefore, even when the Guangling Road War last year was so chaotic, Jiyu Zhentang, who was in charge of the border defense between the two Liao provinces, did not lead his troops south. Because of this, the people of Liang did not believe that the rebel army in West Chu could succeed. But today, at the critical moment when West Chu was destined to collapse, it was this only pillar of the Liang dynasty that said that he wanted a young man not surnamed Zhao to be the emperor. Hsu Fengnian looked at Jiyu Zhentang, who was sitting across from him, picking up his chopsticks and gently poking at the greasy table. He watched as Jiyu Zhentang picked up a dumpling and began to slowly chew it. Hsu Fengnian's expression was as usual. This was the calmness that had been honed through countless battles, but it did not hinder the stormy waves in his heart. Jiyu Zhentang ate 7 or 8 dumplings in one go. He paused for a moment and raised his head to look at the young vassal king that he had only met once. He glanced at the sensitive young woman beside him and said indifferently, "You don't believe me? Today, do I still need to use words to deceive anyone?" After 3 travels in Jianghu, 1 battle in Liangmang, and 2 trips to the capital, Hsu Fengnian was no longer a high-spirited hothead. He smiled and said, "Did you not come to the south to find Cao Changqing, but to predict that I would stop you?" Jiyu Gentang picked up a dumpling and gently shook his chopsticks to shake off some chopped green onions. He was not in a hurry to put it into his mouth. He shook his head and said, "If you didn't come, I would have gone straight to Tian City to kill Cao Changqing. If it was before, I would at most have a 40% chance of winning against the Confucian sage Cao Changqing. Naturally, I would not be able to kill the tyrannical Cao Changqing. At this time, no one can stop Cao Changqing. But if he insists on using human strength to fight against the heavens and wear down the fate of the Liang Zhao clan, then I would have a chance. Since you are here, that's even better. I believe you already know why I want to kill Cao Changqing. Originally, he promised me that once the West Chu matter was completed and the Jiang clan became the co-ruler of the Central Plains, then all the military merits of Beimang would belong to me. I will not refuse this invitation." Hsu Fengnian frowned and said, "Isn't it the same if the West Chu matter is defeated? You, Jiyu Gentang, don't even have to bear the infamy for a while." Jiyu Gentang laughed coldly and said, "What have I done in these 20 years? Wasn't it because I had no choice but to raise the bandits for my own sake? There is Xu Xiao in the northwest and Zhong Julu in the court. That is why I, Jiyu Gentang, am stable. The border towns are divided. Other than you, the vassal kings, who are too big to get rid of, don't forget that there is still the word town. In the Battle of Guangling, how many generals who would not have died? How many generals' power was reduced? All the cavalry, including Yang Zhenchuan, were wiped out. Yang Shenxing's Jizhou infantry were not many left. The Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi's navy infantry were all destroyed. The Prince of Huainan, Zhao Ying, died in battle. No matter how high and powerful the civil officials were, the emperor could find a crime and kill them. But how could the generals at the border be killed so easily? It's more like they rebelled. They have the capital to start a war and cause chaos, and they don't have the misgivings of being infamy in the history books. If I, Jiyu Gentang, were the emperor, for the sake of the country in the long run, I would also emphasize the civil and suppress the military." Eating the dumplings, Jiyu Gentang slowly said, "Do you think the previous emperor Zhao Dun did not make a move against me before his death? Let's not talk about my former subordinates Tang Taizhuang, Tian Zong, and the others who entered the capital to become officials. Let's talk about Lu Shengxiang and Xu Gong, these two people, who were obviously candidates to replace me. Xu Gong replaced the emperor to patrol the border, Lu Shengxiang used the Battle of Guangling to accumulate experience. But why? It's nothing more than to prevent their merits from being too early. The real use of them is still to be used in the Battle of Beimang in the future. They still have a long way to go before their wings are fully developed. To put it bluntly, if you give them 10 or 20 years of military service, at most they'll only be the second Jiyu Gentang. By that time, the situation in Liang will have stabilized. Asking them to remove their armor and return to their fields is much simpler than asking me, Jiyu Gentang, to pack up and get lost. The strategy that Zhong Julu and Yuan Bengxi formulated for the previous emperor is not bad. But as the person involved, how can I, Jiyu Gentang, resign myself to death? Do I need to say more about how the Zhao family treats their meritorious officials? Jiyu Gentang picked up another dumpling. He couldn't help but glance at the female emperor, Da Chu, who was carrying a sword case on her back. He smiled playfully. Hsu Fengnian, do you know what kind of reasons Cao Changqing and her used to convince me when they found me? Hsu Fengnian's face was suddenly filled with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, Mother f***ka. Did Cao Changqing agree to one of your sons becoming empress? If that's really the case, I won't stop you. I'll be Jiyu Gentang's assistant. See if I don't beat Cao Changqing until he can't be domineering anymore. Under the table, one of Hsu Fengnian's feet was ruthlessly stepped on and crushed repeatedly. Perhaps he felt that one foot wasn't strong enough, so he lowered his body and stepped on Hsu Fengnian's feet with both feet. Jiyu Gentang couldn't help but laugh. Cao Changqing wouldn't be so boring. Cao Changqing only said that he could let me flatten Beimang and that he dared to let me lead an army to complete a feat that even Xu Xiao couldn't accomplish. The reason was very simple. When Cao Changqing was alive, no matter how great my military achievements were, I couldn't rebel because Cao Changqing could die together with me. Even if Cao Changqing died before me, when the time came to unify the Central Plains and swallow up Beimang's Da Chu, there would still be someone. As long as I dared to plot against him, there would still be someone who could single-handedly kill me, Jiyu Jiantang. Moreover, that person would definitely live longer than me. Therefore, no matter how powerful the Jiyu family was, it was destined to be peaceful for the next 50 years. As for the specific situation after 50 years, the Jiang and Jiyu families were simply following the will of heaven. Since that's the case, I don't have any worries and I'm not afraid of shocking the master with my achievements. I'm well aware of how Da Chu's Jiang family treats Yi Baikue and how Li Yang's Zhao family treats Xu Xiao. Hsu Fengnian rubbed his chin and smiled. That's more like it. Looking at the smug fellow, Jiang Ni, who hadn't finished eating the dumplings, slammed his chopsticks on the big white bowl. Hsu Fengnian didn't feel guilty at all. Instead, he stared and said, "A bowl of dumplings costs 5 copper coins. There are still 6 dumplings in the bowl. Don't you feel bad for wasting a copper coin? Anyway, I didn't bring any money. You can pay the bill later." Jiang Ni was stunned at first, then he snorted coldly. However, he still silently picked up his chopsticks. Even Jiyu Jiantang, who had a heart as strong as iron, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Jiyu Jiantang shook his head slightly and smiled. "In the same way, you, Hsu Fengnian, are the emperor. Xu Xiao treated his former subordinates well, and you personally went to war. I, Jiyu Jiantang, am not afraid of what happens in life or behind." Hsu Fengnian sighed and muttered, "Being the emperor." Jiyu Jiantang picked up the last dumpling in the bowl and smiled. "Hsu Fengnian, I'm very curious. Has Xu Xiao ever thought of rebelling in his life? Or has he ever thought of having you sit on the dragon throne?" Chapter 1749. Hsu Fengnian did not answer the question, but asked, "Do you know how Cao Changqing convinced Wang Sui? Do you know how Wang Sui feels now?" Jiyu Jiantang hesitated for a moment. The former is simple. Wang Sui has always been unable to let go of the Dongyu royal family, which has become Liang's lackey. Cao Changqing should have promised him that in the future, he would be able to become an official or even a minister. As for the latter, it's hard to say. Maybe Wang Sui will really help Beimang invade the Central Plains in anger. Maybe he will be so depressed that he can only stay in one place and fight with you and me on the battlefield as a general. After all, he and I are mortal enemies. He also has a lot of resentment for the Shu family's destruction of Chuanqiu. Hsu Fengnian sighed, "No one can let go of Chuanqiu." Jiyu Jiantang, who had finished eating the dumplings, put down his chopsticks and looked at Hsu Fengnian. Hsu Fengnian came back to his senses. "If there are no accidents, Beimang will go south this autumn. I will try my best to persuade Wang Sui not to be a troublemaker even if he doesn't cooperate with you and me." Jiyu Jiantang nodded and said in a low voice, "That's the best. Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, has promised me that no matter what happens, he will remain neutral. As long as you can convince Wang Sui to bide his time, I, Jiyu Jiantang, will personally lead the 2 Liao elites north into the heart of the Great Desert after the Great War of Liang Mang enters a stalemate. We will sever the connection between Northern Mang and the Northern Court in one go. At that time, you and I will use Beimang and Nanchao as our depth. We will have a total of 500,000 soldiers and 200,000 iron cavalry. We won't have to worry about the lack of soldiers and can advance and retreat freely. Even if we are sandwiched between Beimang and Liang, what is there to be afraid of?" Hsu Fengnian was silent for a moment, and then suddenly slammed the table. Jiang Ni was shocked, and Jiyu Jiantang's eyelids trembled. Hsu Fengnian shouted, "Waiter, 3 more bowls of dumplings." Jiang Ni took a deep breath and muttered unwillingly with a dark face, 2 bowls is enough." However, the next sentence of the prodigal son, who did not feel bad about not spending his own money, made her feel relieved. Xu Fengnian said to Jiyu Jiantang, "Let's put it on credit. I'll have to trouble Master Jiyu to help pay for it today. My wife and I are embarrassingly short of money. We can't wait to split a copper coin in half." Jiyu Jiantang said with a fake smile, "Oh? That 1 bowl was enough. Like Miss Jiang, I'm not hungry." Blushed and whispered said 2 bowls? I'll have another bowl too. You ask, how many bowls, how many bowls, how many bowls, how many bowls? 3 bowls do you have to pay? Jiyu Gentang, the great pillar state of Liang, said 1 bowl. Jiang Sai, the emperor of Dachu, said 2 bowls. Hsu Fengnian, the king of Beiliang, said 3 bowls. The waiter looked at the 3 of them and said angrily, all right, you 3 don't have to be so stingy. I will treat you to 3 bowls of dumplings for free today. 3 bowls of hot and fragrant dumplings were placed on the table. Jiyu Gentang was the first to finish eating. After bidding farewell to Hsu Fengnian, he led his horse to the stall owner, leaving behind the Liaodong horse that was worth hundreds of taels of silver, and returned to the north alone. The stall owner and the waiter looked at each other. In the end, the 2 of them could not stop smiling. After Hsu Fengnian finished eating the dumplings, he quietly waited for Jiang Genai to finish eating. When he saw Jiang Genai put her chopsticks on the edge of the bowl, he smiled and helped her take the chopsticks off the bowl and neatly place them on the table next to the white bowl. One of the few rules of the old Shu family is not to put the chopsticks on the bowl after eating. She blushed, blinked her eyes, and asked softly, are you really going to be that? Hsu Fengnian said softly, Jiyu Gentang's words can be trusted, but not completely. It is too scary for a person to be able to go from Hongjiao to Yonghui and then to Shangfu. Jiang Genai nodded and said, I don't like this person. Uncle Chui Waijiao said that your father is a tiger out of the forest, Yi Baikue is a flood dragon by the river, Wang Sui is a python by the stream, and Jiyu Gentang is a snake by the hole. The first 3 are all heroes who do not care about personal life and death, honor and disgrace. Only Jiyu Gentang's thoughts are the most gloomy and unpredictable. Hsu Fengnian grunted, I will be careful. Jiang Genai had a big heart. She had heard of Jiyu Gentang being the emperor, so she did not care. She suddenly became sad and said pitifully, can't you save Uncle Chui Waijiao? If Beiliang had Uncle Chui Waijiao to come up with plans, you would not be so tired. Hsu Fengnian said helplessly, it is not that I do not want to save him, but that I cannot and cannot save him. After a long silence, Jiang Genai suddenly said carefully, Uncle Chui Waijiao schemed against you. Do not be angry. Hsu Fengnian shook his head and said with a smile, it is not important whether I am angry or not. I only know that the conqueror of West Chu is very angry at the world, so he wants to vent his anger on Great Peace City. The little mud person lowered her head and started to wipe her tears. She sobbed, I do not want Uncle Chui Waijiao to die. Hsu Fengnian did not know how to comfort her. He only said softly, the spring and autumn period is really over. Great Peace City. Wave after wave of arrow rain did not stop as they furiously rained down on that green robe. But the chess pieces outside the city were placed faster and faster. Almost as soon as a pillar of light hit the top of Great Peace City, a second pillar of light from the 9 heavens would follow closely behind. Every time a chess piece was placed and a pillar of light appeared, all the arrows would shatter in midair. They could not get close. The eaves of the palaces and pavilions in Great Peace City were shattered. The bell and drum towers of the temples and Daoist temples were also slightly shorter. The birds and pigeons in the city seemed to feel the pressure of the sky sinking. They flew lower and lower until they were below the tall pavilions. They had no choice but to circle anxiously under the eaves. The spring water thawed and gradually warmed. The fish that had been swimming leisurely in the rivers and lakes began to jump out of the water and call out to the birds in the sky. On the top of the city wall, Chai Qingshan had already attacked once. The sword on his back, Wild Fox, truly displayed the presence of an earth immortal. It tore through the air with dazzling light. The majesty of the sword Qi and the vastness of the sword Intent caused an enormous white arc to appear between the top of the city wall and the green-robed chess player. The white arc rose from the top of the city wall and landed on top of the green-robed Cao Chongqing's head. In the end, the white arc seemed to collide with an invisible pool of lightning that could not be crossed. It created a large ball of sparks and lightning, and the sound was ear-piercing. The sect master of the Dongyu sword pool raised his arm high into the air and drew in his qi. The wild fox quickly flew around Cao Chongqing, who was sitting cross-legged. Unfortunately, no matter how great the commotion was, the flying sword could only fly around like a headless fly. It was unable to get within 10 meters of Cao Changqing. Chapter 1750. When the flying sword could not bear the weight and broke, Chai Qingshan swallowed the blood that had surged to his throat. He took a step forward and pointed forward with 2 fingers. He shouted, "Borrow the sword." The long sword on the young girl's back instantly flew out of its scabbard. Like a young serpent coming out of the water, a green energy as thick as the mouth of a well smashed forward. The present Liang River and lake had not reached the stage of withering incense, but people with eyes could see that it was turning from prosperity to decline. It was rumored that Huang Sanjia had gone against the flow and poured the remaining luck of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn into the pool of the Jianghu. Therefore, in the past 20 years, the water was full. The Jianghu of Liang seemed to be full of vegetation and life, but in reality, there were not many trees left. The liveliness would not last long. In this city that was the most virtuous in the world, Jiyu Jiantang and Xie Guanying were no longer in the city. Yang Taisui, Han Shengxian, Master Liu Hao, and Qi Jiajie had died one after another. The Qi cultivators of the imperial astronomer had almost all died. The 2 large formations that were the eyes of the formation had been destroyed in the hands of Hsu Fengnian. Therefore, Chai Qingshan had to stand out. The old man was for the sect, for his disciple, and for his own way of the sword. When the long sword in the scabbard of the young girl came at him like a swimming dragon, Cao Changqing was still unmoved. He smiled faintly, his right hand holding a piece, his left hand brushing the cuff of his right hand. He seemed to be whispering to someone. There was once someone in Da Chu who used troops, the more the better. He was unstoppable. In 72 major and minor battles, he did not lose a single one. He placed the piece lightly. The flying sword with a powerful presence fell to the ground 3 zhong away. It was like a huge rock that had smashed into the ground, causing dust to fly. Cao Changqing did not look at the long sword. He only looked at a black piece that jumped out of the box and landed on the chessboard. At the same time, he reached out to pick up a round and cool white piece. He said with a smile, "There was someone in Da Chu who wrote poems that were like a bow of 100 stones, a crossbow of 1,000 catties, like a full moon hanging above the heads of the people." It caused the younger generation to have the thought that they could only kowtow and not speak. It is truly magnificent. When the piece landed, the steelies in front of the China Child prison in Great Peace City cracked inch by inch. There's someone in Da Chu who talks as if he's possessed by a deity. The chess piece on his wrist is like a fierce general fighting for his life. His spirit is extraordinary. As the chess piece was placed, Cao Zhongqing slightly straightened the root-like white chess piece that had deviated slightly. At the same time, all the crossbow bolts that had been shot at his opponent were blown away by a gust of wind and quickly slid out of their original trajectories. The people of Da Chu, the Milky Way is brilliant. There have been fables from various philosophers, teachings from eminent monks, and sermons from enlightened people. Why should the human world envy the heavens? On the chessboard, the black and white go pieces flew down. The old ancestor of the Wu family's sword tomb, Wu Jian, finally made his move. This family's sword path leader, whose family's sword art was the world's sword art, did not descend from the top of the city walls. From the outer city to the imperial city, all the city gates opened at the same time. Then, a thin but extremely long sword qi went from north to south, all the way south. This wisp of sword qi had the momentum of 1,000 riders crashing into each other. After Chai Qingshan attacked, he did not turn his head. After Wu Jian attacked, he still did not turn his head. Cao Changqing said softly, "In the spring and autumn, the wind and rain are turbulent. Some people cry, some hide from the rain under the eaves, some use umbrellas. Only Da Chu will not hide from the rain. I would rather die in the rain than live under someone else's roof." The sword qi paused slightly when it was 3 zhong away from Cao Changqing. Then it suddenly exerted force and charged out 2.5 zhong. The sword qi didn't dissipate until it was 20 feet away. When the second sword qi came out of the city, a pillar of light coincidentally hit the head of the old man at the gates of the imperial city. The old master of the Wu family sword tomb raised his hand and shattered it with a wave of his sleeve. His face paled slightly and the ground he was standing on caved in. The old man with his back to the gates of the imperial city slowly walked out of the large hole and stepped out. There was a straight line from the front of him to the imperial road south of Great Peace City. The crack that appeared on the ground was like a long sword. This sword was not more than an inch wide, but it was several li long. In this moment, the sword chi was about to leave the city. Cao Changqing had coincidentally placed a piece closest to the chessboard in front of him. At the beginning of the imperial road inside the city gates, a pillar of light fell down like a long sword cutting a snake. Wu Jian, who had left the city with the sword chi, stood at the gates of the city. He did not have a sword in his hand but made a sword-drawing posture. He shouted, "Cao Changqing, it is not easy to come by, turn back and be saved." Cao Changqing picked up a piece. This time, before he could place it, the piece at his fingertips shattered. A snowy white sword light appeared in the air to his side. Then there was the sound of an enormous collision, like the morning bell and evening drum ringing in their ears. Everyone on the city walls and below the city walls widened their eyes. They saw dust fill the air where the indigo-robed person was sitting. It was impossible to see that person's figure. When the dust settled, everyone was on tenterhooks again. Cao Changqing had not died under that sword and continued to remain motionless. The earth where he was sitting had been shaved off several feet, so Cao Changqing was sitting in the air. The black and white pieces on the chessboard did not move at all. The white-haired middle-aged Confucian scholar finally raised his head. He did not look at the Sword Tomb family master in the northern city gate, but turned his head to the south. He said softly, "You are in this great Chu, whether you live or die, I am also here, always will be here." At this time, almost everyone's heart trembled. A woman in purple stood up from a tall building in Great Peace City. She lightly landed on the imperial road. Her body leaned forward slightly and she started to run out of the city. Her form, will, energy, and spirit were all at the peak of the world. Even the Wu family Sword Tomb old ancestor standing at the end of the imperial road had to avoid her. He let her charge out of the city. Cao Changqing placed his piece extremely slowly this time. The purple robe, purple aura, and purple rainbow charged to within 10 feet of Cao Changqing. Shenyuan Qingfeng on the snowy plains of Mount Hui. The purple robe crashed within 10 feet and then stopped. The woman's fingers were like hooks and were only 2 or 3 feet away from Cao Changqing's head. Cao Changqing, who was indifferent to this, leaned forward, one hand holding his sleeve to avoid messing up the chessboard. When this piece landed, the sound was especially crisp. The sound of the piece landing softly sounded on the chessboard. She was sent flying backward, her body tumbling in the air. Shenyuan Qingfeng's back was pressed against the city wall. Her eyes were cold, her elbows pressed against the city wall. Her knees were a mess and blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. The blue-robed Confucian scholar, who had been defeated at some point, sat quietly where he was. He bit his lips and shook his head. The Confucian saint of Da Chu, Cao Changqing. He finally said something he had not said for 20 years. "This world says that you caused the fall of Da Chu. I, Cao Changqing, do not agree." For the first time since he came to the city alone, he raised his hand high and then placed a piece heavily on the chessboard. The clouds tumbled as they descended together. The sky of the central plains dropped 100 feet. Chapter 1751. There were countless lofty mountains and precipitous ridges in the southern border. Someone was skimming across the peaks of the mountains. There was always a swift and fierce flying sword following him like a shadow. He suddenly stopped on the branch of a towering tree at the peak of the mountain and looked up. The flying sword also stopped chasing him at the peak of the mountain before him. It hovered in the air and hummed slightly. An average-looking middle-aged man stood near the flying sword. He also looked up at the sky and sighed. Then, he stood on one leg like a golden rooster. He lifted one leg and bent down to take off his hemp shoe and shook it. The man in a scholarly robe who had been chased all the way from Great Peace City to the deep mountains and forests of the southern border laughed and said, "Ng Tai, oh Ng Tai, Cao Changqing is seeking his own death. The Empress of West Chu, Jiang Sai, has also left the capital of West Chu. Not long later, even you will be able to feel the collapse of the great pillar of fate of West Chu." At that time, other than Tantai Pingjing, that old woman, who replaced me and stole a part of it, there will only be Chen Zhibao and Zhao Zhu who will benefit greatly. As long as Chen Zhibao absorbs half of the fate of West Chu, as the most important person supporting the dragon, let's see how you, NG Tai, will kill me. Not to mention the 4 grandmasters of the martial arts assessment. Even among the 14 martial arts assessment masters, the Peach Blossom Sword God, NG Tai, was definitely the one who did not have the demeanor of an expert. However, it was this average-looking middle-aged uncle who had chased Xie Guanying, the number 1 on the immortal map of land and dynasty, into such a sorry state. NG Tai put on his shoes and curled his lips. He said unhappily, "Are you saying that after a pure martial artist like me becomes an immortal on land, I will be hurt by fate if I kill someone with fate?" Sorry, back then, there was an old Daoist on Mount Longhu who had returned to simplicity. He was killed by me when he ascended. It's fine. Xie Guanying sneered, "How can I be the same as Wu Lingsu of the Celestial Master Residence?" NG Tai rolled his eyes. "In my opinion, there's really no difference." Xie Guanying laughed loudly and said, "Then I'll wait and see how your cultivation realm drop." NG Tai put away his casual expression and said seriously, "I don't care who should follow the will of heaven to suppress who, or who should follow the will of heaven to defeat who, and I don't care who the fate of the world flows to. I don't care about these things. I'm not even interested in becoming an earth immortal, let alone attaining the Tao and ascending." Xie Guanying said angrily, "You lunatic. You are even more unreasonable than Lu Dongxian and Li Chungang." NG Tai turned his head to look at the flying sword, which was made of ordinary materials. He laughed heartily and said, "I, NG Tai, have the 3-foot sword by my side for the rest of my life. It's enough." Xie Guanying clearly felt a monstrous murderous aura. It disappeared in a flash, and he fled even faster than before. The mountain under Xie Guanying's feet was flattened by the sword. NG Tai did not immediately pursue him. He raised his head again and looked at the unusually low clouds. "Cao Changqing, oh Cao Changqing, Li Chungang left, Wang Xianji left, and now even you are leaving." NG Tai suddenly laughed. 1 man and 1 sword flew into the sky. They passed through the clouds and arrived above the sea of clouds where the sun shone. NG Tai stood cross-legged on the flying sword. He raised his head and looked at the golden sun in the sky. NG Tai was bathed in the golden light. He stood on the flying sword and was lost in thought. In the end, NG Tai gave a thumbs up to the sky and slowly turned to the ground. NG Tai said loudly, "I, NG Tai, am already here in this life. In this life, I am already here. What can you do to me? Who dares to ask me, NG Tai, if I can use my sword?" No immortal in the heavens could answer this question. On the ground, Xie Guanying muttered repeatedly, "Lunatic, lunatic Deng. Cao Changqing is a lunatic. You, NG Tai, are also lunatics." An official wearing a golden embroidered robe walked up to the top of the city wall with a straight face. He was in the prime of his life, just over 40 years old. If it had been during the Yonghui era when the Liang court was stable, he would have been an eye-catching existence. At the age of 40, he had become a second-rank official, the head of the Ministry of Justice. How could he not be proud? His surname was Liu, and his name was Iyo. He was born as a Jinsha in the 8th year of Yonghui. Compared to Yin Maochuan's famous Yonghui spring, he was a few years later. Liu Iyo's talent was not obvious. His family was unknown, and he only had a very poetic name. However, Liu Iyo's personality was ridiculed by Taiyan City as a stubborn rock in the latrine pit. He had been the vice-director of the Ministry of Justice for almost 10 years and sat on the cold bench for almost 10 years. In the end, in the first year of Xiangfu, he was promoted to a doctor. Last year, he was promoted to assistant minister. This spring, in fact, it was only 3 days ago that he was promoted to minister of the Ministry of Justice of Liang. In addition to being in charge of the 4 departments of the Ministry of Justice, he also held the power to kill all the people of Liang in name. He was secretly responsible for the issuance of the embroidered copper fish pouches. The people who followed behind Liu Iyo to the top of the city wall all had embroidered copper fish pouches hanging from their waists. Among them, there were 36 famous swordsmen, 18 blade masters, and 14 fist masters. The appearance of Liu Iyo and this group of Jianghu masters was close to 70 people. Immediately, the originally devoid of the aura of spring on the city wall added a bit of the austere aura of autumn. Liu Iyo was a weak scholar, but even if he stood together with the Wu family's sword tomb elder, Chai Qingshan of the Dongyu sword pool, and Shenyuan Qingfeng of the Great Snow Plateau, his aura was not inferior. Wu Jian stood behind the arrow battlement with his hands behind his back, his expression serious. Chai Qingshan borrowed a second sword, Green Fox, from the young girl Shan Yi. He stood with his sword in hand and closed his eyes to rest. The purple-robed man sat directly on the battlement with his arms crossed and squinted his eyes to look into the distance. Liu Iyo faced the 3 martial arts grandmasters who were strong enough to look down on nobles and said calmly, "The 68 people of the Ministry of Justice are willing to fight for a chance for the 3 of you. I hope that the 3 of you can cooperate sincerely. We can't let that West Chu Cao Changqing continue to run amok in the capital." Wu Jian was silent. Chai Qingshan nodded slightly. Only Shenyuan Qingfeng sneered and said, "The reason why I acted was because Cao Changqing was worthy of my action." "Are you worthy of ordering me around?" Liu Iyo, who was considered a junior compared to the other leaders of the Ministry of Justice, said expressionlessly, "As long as the Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui is still in Liang's territory, as long as Zhenju is still in Liang's territory, I, Liu Iyo." Not waiting for this official to finish speaking, Shenyuan Qingfeng placed his hands on his knees. Chai Qingshan was standing in front of Liu Iyo at some point. However, there was still a trace of blood on the latter's cheek and some of his hair fell to the ground. Liu Iyo didn't even bother to wipe his wound. He gently pushed Chai Qingshan away and stared at the beautiful woman who was known for her arrogance. "You can kill me, and I can also die. However, as long as you, Shenyuan Qingfeng, appear on the walls of Great Peace City, as long as you stand in my sight, you will have to leave the city to fight. It's not that I, Liu Iyo, am using the banner of the Ministry of Justice to threaten you, and it's not that I, Liu Iyo, am asking for your help. Other than His Majesty the Emperor, there is no one else in this city that I cannot do without." Shenyuan Qingfeng leaned back and tilted his head. For the first time, he looked directly at this young minister. He said mockingly, "You are that poor scholar Liu Iyo from Guangling Path, right? Did I remember your hometown wrongly?" Liu Iyo's eyes were dark. It was unknown whether it was the shrewdness of a high official or the temperament of a scholar, but he did not become angry out of humiliation. He said calmly, "Those who walk different paths cannot work together." Shenyuan Qingfeng smiled. "Oh." Standing between Shenyuan Qingfeng and Chai Qingshan, the old ancestor of the Wu family sword tomb frowned. He reached out a hand and casually grabbed. There was a bang in the air. He turned his head and said sincerely to the purple-clothed woman who killed people at every turn, "Little girl, if you don't change your personality, you won't be able to be number 1 in the world." For some reason, Shenyuan Qingfeng felt more respect for this old man. He was very cold to Chai Qingshan of the Dongyu sword pool. After hearing Wu Jian's kind reminder, she did not comment. She turned her head and continued to look outside the city. The qi in her body began to circulate rapidly. Her aura increased dramatically, and her purple clothes fluttered. She sat on the city wall like a unique scenery of the Jianghu. It seemed that no one in the Jianghu understood what this woman was thinking. Why did she suddenly become the patriarch of the Shenyuan family in the Great Snow Plains? Why did she go to the Guangling River to stop Wang Shenji? Why did she challenge the new Prince Liang in Great Peace City? Why did she go out of the city to fight Cao Changqing today? Perhaps she was like a crazy child who did not grow up without parents. She was unwilling to be reasonable in everything she did. However, her cultivation was too high, and she had risen too quickly. Her opportunities were also too good. Therefore, no one had the qualifications to make her a graceful lady from a respectable family. Shenyuan Qingfeng looked up at the sky. Above her was a sea of clouds. The entire central plains were like this. She narrowed her eyes and felt slightly sad. She also liked someone, but she did not know how to let him know. It seemed that she did not dare and was not willing to let him know. Then she would let him remember her name. No matter where he went in the Jianghu, the battlefield, or the court, There would be stories of her deeds in the world. Since he could not be like her father who only liked her mother, then she would rather have nothing. Shenyuan Qingfeng suddenly flew out of the city wall. She did not care about the cooperation of the experts of the Ministry of Justice, nor was she willing to work with Wu Jian and Chai Qingshan, the two grandmasters of the sword. She came to Great Peace City alone, and she left Great Peace City alone. The purple robe once again charged towards Cao Changqing. She was impassioned and did not fear death. Even Liu Yi couldn't help but be impressed when he saw this scene. If there was a woman like this in the world would not be lonely. Cao Changqing's lips curled up. He ignored Shenyuan Qingfeng's charge and smiled slightly. He looked at the chessboard. If you do not know in your dreams, how can you know in your life? A long time later, in the Jianghu where there were only Yu Delong and Go Yufang, there was actually a promise of 10 years that no one knew about. Chapter 1752. Every 10 years, she would come out of seclusion on time and sit alone on the rooftop of the missing moon tower in the great snow plains. She would wear a purple robe and take out a jar of Osmanthus wine from under the Osmanthus tree, waiting for someone to fulfill their promise of 10 years. After the third time, it was the fourth time. That day, it was raining heavily, and he did not find her. She failed to fulfill her promise. There was only a jar of Osmanthus wine on the rooftop, allowing the rain to beat against it. Outside the window, the rain was heavy and the wind was strong. The woman in purple sat in front of the dressing table. The woman in the bronze mirror already had white hair. It was better not to see her. Her skirt was tied in a small knot. Beside her feet was an umbrella that she had treasured for more than 40 years. She lay on the dressing table and fell asleep. She seemed to be having a beautiful dream. She was smiling. There was an old man who didn't look old. He entered the house without knocking. He put away the wet oil paper umbrella, stood at the door, and asked with a smile, "It's raining heavily outside. A lot of fish are going to drown. Do you want to go take a look?" She slept and did not wake up. Everyone in Great Peace City saw an absurd scene. The woman in purple had clearly crashed into Cao Changqing in West Chu and had clearly passed by him. However, Cao Changqing remained sitting in his original spot, while Shenyuan Qingfeng stood in her original spot a few dozen feet to the south of Cao Changqing like an old monk in meditation. Cao Changqing did not look sideways. He picked up a go piece from the go box and gently placed it down. He turned his head and smiled. "It's time to wake up." Shenyuan Qingfeng, who seemed to have been dreaming for 40 years, suddenly woke up. Her back was to the official in green. She did not know when, but tears had streamed down her face. She did not turn around. She stretched and wiped her face with her hands. Smiling, she said, "It really was a good dream." Hearing this, Cao Changqing smiled and said, "That's good." Just as Shenyuan Qingfeng was hesitating about whether to turn around and thank him, Cao Changqing slowly retracted his gaze and looked back at the go board that already had more than 90 go pieces. He smiled and said, "I'm fine. Just don't learn from me." The heavens and the earth were vast. Jiangnan's Guangling had the cool breeze, bright moon, and great river. Northwest Zhejiang had the boundless yellow sand. Let's see everything first before deciding on life and death. Life and death were the most important things in life, especially when one was young. One shouldn't make careless decisions. Life wasn't easy, and death was simple. Between life and death, there is also fate. A person's life has to be more exciting than a plant's autumn. Shenyuan Qingfeng nodded. As long as I, Shenyuan Qingfeng, am alive, I will try my best to reduce the number of deaths among West Chu survivors. Cao Changqing dismissed it with a smile. Shenyuan Qingfeng flashed past. At the end of that big dream, she clearly knew that she didn't wake up, or rather, she was already dead. However, she could see that bastard with the umbrella standing alone at the door. His lips moved slightly, but he couldn't say anything. Shenyuan Qingfeng suddenly threw his head back and laughed loudly. "Old bastard." The inexplicable abrupt departure of this purple robe did not delay Liu Yi from ordering the Ministry of Justice to go out of the city to kill the enemy. 68 Jianghu experts that the Ministry of Justice and Zhao Go had gathered from all over Great Peace City left the city together. They were like a flock of birds flying out of the branches. This time, Cao Changqing placed a piece at the corner of the chessboard. Then, he pressed 2 fingers lightly on the piece and pushed it forward. Therefore, between Cao Changqing and Great Peace City, between the north and the south, a turbulent energy like the Guangling River appeared. 68 experts seemed to be crossing the Guangling River during flood season. It was difficult and slow. There were constantly people who used up their energy and fell to the ground. Chai Qingshan held his sword and flashed out. With one sword, he cut apart that great river of energy. Cao Changqing's right hand picked up a piece and placed it on his left hand. He lightly swept it to the right. Instantly, a wave of sword energy surged out from left to right. Cao Changqing then placed a piece from top to bottom on the chessboard. In the air, a particularly majestic and resplendent pillar of light fell straight down from top to bottom. Between heaven and earth, one horizontal and one vertical, 2 waves of sword energy. They attacked Chai Qingshan of the Eastern Yu Sword Pool and Wu Jian of the Wu family sword tomb. Cao Changqing was not in a hurry to pick up a piece. He stared at the chessboard and said to himself, I, Cao Changqing, also have the Haoran sword. Chai Qingshan held half of the broken sword and landed 20 zhong to the north of Cao Changqing. There was a large pool of blood on his chest. Wu Jian stood 100 zhong in front of Chai Qingshan. The clothing at his shoulder was in tatters. The old man reached out with his right hand. There was a snow-white sword energy that seemed tangible in his hand. He said in a deep voice, Cao Changqing, you will not hesitate to have your body and soul destroyed to finish this game? Cao Changqing did not answer. On the city wall, the Minister of War, Liu Yiyu, pressed his hands against the city wall, his hands trembling. As a poor scholar from the Guangling Taoism, he recognized Cao Changqing. He was not in West Chu, but in Liang, an enemy state of West Chu. He was in this Taiyan city. However, before Cao Changqing and West Chu's Empress Jiang Sai came to the capital in the first year of Xiangfu, Liu Yiyu, who no one cared about in the Ministry of Justice's Yamen, only knew a traveling Confucian scholar he met by chance, knew the scholar who would treat him to a meal of wine every time he entered the capital. Liu Yiyu couldn't afford a residence, so he could only rent a small, remote courtyard in the capital's southeast. During those years, whenever he saw that smiling middle-aged man in front of his deserted door, Liu Yiyu would always be pleasantly surprised and happy. In the officialdom, the taciturn Liu Yiyu liked to complain to this elegant and cultured senior scholar, to this Mr. Cao who he only knew his surname. After he got drunk, he said that his teacher was that Grand Secretary Great One who had students all over the world. He was clearly the top scorer in that year's examination, his essay not losing to the top 3, yet in the end, he was only a jinsha. He felt like it was Grand Secretary Zhong Julu who purposely looked down on Guangling scholars, which was why everyone only knew that Bai Yang had students like Yin Mao Chun, Zhao Yuling, Yuan Guo, and the others, not Liu Yiyu. Meanwhile, Grand Secretary Zhong Julu also never considered him his student, let alone the disciple he was proud of. Meanwhile, after that Mr. Cao heard his essay for the examination word for word, he laughed and said that this essay was exactly the same as Bai Yang Er's when he was young, deeply understanding the essence of avoiding the high and dispersing, avoiding the empty and distant, a good essay. However, it was precisely because of this that Grand Secretary Zhong had you sit on a cold bench for many years like him, that you, Liu Yiyu, must not be impatient. Afterwards, half of Liu Yiyu felt relieved, half of it was because he had given up. He knew his place, kept his feet on the ground, burying his head in his work as a small official in the Ministry of Justice. However, what left him completely disheartened was that even when the Grand Secretary's reputation was in tatters, when he risked universal condemnation to pay him a visit, all for the sake of a teacher-student relationship, that Grand Secretary not only refused to meet him, he even had the gatekeeper pass him a message. Who is Liu Yiyu? I, Zhong Julu, have this type of disciple? I don't remember. That evening, Liu Yiyu returned to his simple and crude small courtyard, dead drunk. However, after that Grand Secretary died, after he was promoted to Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Qi Yanglong found someone to give him an extremely ordinary scripture, only saying that it was something he accidentally flipped through in someone's house. Liu Yiyu discovered that there were 2 old examination papers that were already turning yellow inside the book. It was no more than 1,000 words, but there were actually 16 comments totaling more than 500 words. At the end was that sentence, "Good talent comes out of Guangling, can also become a pillar. I should carefully nurture him for the country. When I die, he will be of great use." Liu Yiyu's eyes were moist. He did his best to keep them open, standing on the city wall, staring fixedly at that green-clothed man. "Mr. Cao, I was born in Da. I do not dare forget my roots. Therefore, in the future, I will seek peace in the imperial court for the sake of all the West Chu survivors. Mr. Cao, as Zhongjulu's student, I do not dare forget your kindness. Therefore, today, I have no choice but to stand here and take you as my enemy." Cao Changqing suddenly turned his head to look at this Minister of Justice who was rapidly rising in Liang's officialdom. He revealed a faint smile, only gratification in his eyes. Nothing needed to be said. Rather than die heroically for one's country and one's surname, it was better to live dishonorably for the common people of the world. "Liu Yi scholar, don't learn from me, Cao Changqing." Cao Changqing once again sat upright and still, facing the chessboard, unable to take his eyes off it. Silent and motionless. Heaven and earth resonated. Heaven and man forgot. Chapter 1753. In Taiyan City, Sun Yin, the arrogant scholar who had once again found an excuse to ask for leave and not go to the Yamen for the roll call, galloped madly out the door. He first found the small bookcase of the imperial astronomer, then pulled the youth with him and rushed straight to the Hanlin Academy. After finding the only 10th Dan of the Liang dynasty, Fan Zhonghu, he asked for 2 boxes of chess pieces and picked a room near the window to store miscellaneous items. He pulled Fan Zhonghu and the youth supervisor to squat on the floor and began to review Cao Changqing's game. The supervisor was responsible for explaining where Cao Changqing's pieces were placed. Fan Zhonghu followed the order of placing the pieces and at the same time explained the mystery behind them. However, the further they went, especially after 20 moves, whether it was Fan Zhonghu or the youth supervisor, they all said that the person who played black first was mediocre. The first 10 moves could be considered passable, but it was also because they were familiar with the exquisite moves of the older generation of West Chu players. According to this person's level, not to mention entering the Liang chessboard to await the imperial decree, even Sun Yin himself would be able to win. Ignoring Sun Yin, who was being mocked and ridiculed, he sank into deep thought. Fan Zhonghu grabbed a handful of black and white chess pieces with one hand and was ready to place them down at any time. His other hand held his chin and his brows were tightly furrowed. Sun Yin muttered to himself, "Cao Changqing, as the #1 official in the world, is this the last game of his life just like this?" Against such a mediocre player, he was able to tangle endlessly for 100 moves. Fan Zhonghu didn't say anything. The youth supervisor sneered, "What do you know? Can you see how many moves the black pieces have made?" Cao Changqing's opponent was clearly a crappy chess player who only knew how to memorize. He was probably someone who frequently came into contact with West Chu players. From Li Mi, who was known to make West Chu players shout heaven above, to Wang Qingshan, who was publicly known to only let Li Mi go first, and then to Ji Yu, who lost a piece to Wang Qingshan. All along the way, it could be said that all of the proud moves of the West Chu players had been forcefully used by the black player in this game. Coincidentally, with this hodgepodge of unreasonable moves, the black and white was actually a tie. Therefore, it could be said that Cao Changqing, who was playing white, did this on purpose. Otherwise, who in the world would dare to play Cao Changqing's first move? My grandpa Jian Zheng can't, Huang Longsha can't, no one can, even 1,000 years later, no one could. Sun Yin looked at Fan Zhonghu. The latter nodded lightly. Sun Yin slapped his forehead, speechless. Great Peace City was still trembling. After each earthquake, Fan Zhonghu would accurately place a piece under the direction of the youth from the imperial astronomer. Fan Zhonghu suddenly raised his head and asked, "It's about to end. Are you not going to say hello?" The youth pretended not to hear and muttered, "The mysteries of heaven cannot be revealed. I still want to live a few more years, and leave this city to go out and see." Sun Yin's ears were sharp. Hearing this, he couldn't help but tease, "You brat, not only do you have a foul mouth, you're also very slippery." The youth with the nickname Little Bookcase mocked, "Little cat, I don't even want to talk to you. Kid Cat was an unconventional nickname given to Sun Yin by the young man. He tore down the Sun character and translated the Yin character. Fan Zhonghu messed up the game and said with a smile, "Let's not play this game. Mr. Cow's chess skills can only be judged by old supervisor and, in any case, only 2 people can comment. As to how Mr. Cow is outside of chess, it's not something we can comment on." Sun Yin stared at the youth who was not wearing the robes of an official but was dressed in white. The latter hesitated and glanced outside the window. "In the end," he said, "the Zhao family of Li Yang has lost much of their destiny. If not for this, I would have gone to complain to Sister Empress long ago. Looking at the situation, that Cao Changqing is showing signs of losing all of his destiny to Guangling Path. So boring. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have revived the country." Sun Yin's eyes suddenly turned red as he shouted angrily, "Shut up." Fan Zhonghu sighed softly and said, "Little bookcase, don't say any more." The youth became angry and left with a wave of his sleeve. Sun Yin squatted there, his chin on his folded arm. He said to himself, "Cao Changqing wants to let Li Yang know that whoever wins Guangling wins the world." Fan Zhonghu nodded. "It's a good thing. Guangling Path will have fewer deaths." Sun Yin said with a wooden expression, "Feelings naturally can't be eaten as rice. But without feelings, it's like cooking without seasoning. Every meal is plain white rice with tasteless vegetables. Over time, there really won't be anything to chew. Some tastes can make your eyes fill with tears, make your teeth chatter, and make your liver and gallbladder break. This is probably feelings." Fan Zhonghu silently began to pack up the chess pieces. Sun Yin asked, "Why do you mock those who have feelings?" Fan Zhonghu thought for a moment. "People who are too smart don't like to have feelings. People who are too simple and stupid can't have feelings. That's why both don't like this thing." Sun Yin grinned. "I should be the former." Fan Zhonghu slowly put the chess pieces back into the box. He smiled. "I should be the latter." Sun Yin's eyes suddenly became as sharp as knives. "Then Huang Longsha?" Fan Zhonghu's expression was normal as he asked in response, "Then Hsu Fengnian?" The two smiled at each other. They did not overdo it. They were light. The sky shook and the earth shook. This time, the shaking was especially intense. The 2 people in the room fell to the ground at the same time and then felt suffocated. Dust poured down from the roof beams. Sun Yin lay on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. Fan Zhonghu continued to pack up the chess pieces. Outside Great Peace City, in front of Cao Changqing, in the black and white chess boxes, there was only one chess piece left. Wu Jian of the Wu family sword tomb and Chai Qingshan of the Dongyu sword pool could not break through that 1 zhong of distance. Cao Changqing remained calm. Great Peace City was shaken again and again. There was no one in the cavalry outside the city who could ride on horseback. How could they charge and kill? The archers outside the city had spasming arms. There were no arrows in their quiver, so how could they rain arrows? Chai Qingshan was bathed in blood even though that indigo robe had not intentionally attacked him. Wu Jian's palm was a bloody mess and white bone could be seen. Chai Qingshan spat out a mouthful of blood and grimaced. "First, I saw Hsu Fengnian receive that sword, and then I saw you, Cao Changqing, being as immovable as a mountain. This life is almost over. Cao Changqing, if you get up and enter the city now, I cannot stop you. I will not block the way here." Chai Qingshan turned and slowly walked back to the city gates. His back was bent and he looked old. Wu Jian, who had been standing between Cao Zhongqing and the city gate, made way for him. He sighed and said, "Although I still have the strength for 1 sword strike, I definitely won't be able to block it. My Wu family's sword tomb has been extremely benevolent to the Central Plains. It's time to stand aside and watch. After all, if we keep the last bit of power, it may be useful in the future." As Cao Changqing stopped playing chess, heaven and earth fell silent. Cao Changqing smiled as he looked across. The last black chess piece finally jumped out of the box. It seemed that the person holding the black chess piece was somewhat hesitant. It swayed back and forth, unwilling to land. Or it could be said that it did not know where to land. Cao Changqing leaned forward slightly. He held the chess piece with 2 fingers on one hand and extended a finger with the other to point at a certain spot on the chessboard. He said softly, "You might as well place it here." Sure enough, the black stone landed on that spot. Cao Changqing put down the hand holding the chess piece. He smiled but did not say anything, as if he had admitted defeat. More than 200 black and white chess pieces hovered in the air. Cao Changqing closed his eyes. "You won. But I, Cao Changqing, never felt that I had lost. This game of chess was the proudest game of my life, Cao Changqing." The corners of Cao Changqing's mouth curled up slightly. He suddenly waved the sleeve of the hand holding the chess piece. The chess piece went from south to north. After entering the city, it charged along the long imperial road, smashing through the gates of the imperial city, the gates of the palace, and the gates of the Hall of Martial Heroes. Only when it smashed through the dragon throne that the previous emperors of Liang had sat on did the chess piece turn to dust. Cao Changqing opened his eyes. His face was covered in tears, but there was no sorrow on his face. He slowly extended a hand in front of him. It was only at this moment that the old green robe was soaked in fresh blood. A cool breeze blew through the world. It blew away the stench of blood, and also blew away the wind. Cao Changqing's fingers began to dissipate. Then his arm, and then his body. The black and white chess pieces also vanished. In the end, that blue robe could no longer be seen outside Great Peace City. There was no more Cao Guanzi in the world. Chapter 1754. The rain was the worst during the Qingming festival. On the Beiliang Posthouse Road in the drizzle, large groups of Yuju cavalry were constantly rushing to the Liangju Pass. In addition, the cavalry troops in Liangju who had come to reinforce Qingcang City had yet to return to their station, which meant that almost all the main forces of Beiliang, especially the cavalry, had surfaced and become the absolute main force in the next battle of Liang Mang. It would evolve from a siege battle to an unprecedented large-scale cavalry battle. In the fierce collision between the nomadic civilization in the north and the agricultural civilization in the Central Plains, one was active and the other was passive. The former relied on the advantage of the number of war horses to invade the pass, while the latter relied on the crossbows in the city to defend. In history, countless cities outside the Great Wall and near the border had been submerged in the tide of cavalry. In the sound of horse hooves in the north, the words isolated city and slaughtered city followed closely. As a result, in the past 20 years, countless civil officials would secretly daydream in the imperial court, thinking that if the 2 elite cavalry troops of Liang, hundreds of thousands of Beiliang cavalry troops and nearly 100,000 border cavalry troops of the 2 Liao provinces, could sincerely cooperate to fight against the enemy and compete with the Beimang barbarians on horseback, what a magnificent scene it would be. In Yanji County, which bordered Yuju and Liangju, on a muddy road, 2 horses stopped at a fork to make way for a caravan of merchants. The young man was wearing a green robe, with a cold saber hanging from his waist, and his mount was one of the few war horses in the Yuju army. The woman in white was carrying a long cotton bag on her back and a saber hanging from her waist. The young man stopped his horse to make way for the caravan, and the woman of the same age next to him was as beautiful as a fairy. This made the head of the guards in the caravan, who was in charge of clearing the way, tremble in his heart. He hurriedly told his subordinates to pass a message to the arrogant guys in the caravan behind him, who were used to speaking dirty words, telling them not to be unscrupulous just because they had some connections with the Beiliang frontier army. A young man who dared to openly hang a new cold saber on himself was definitely not someone that the second or third-rate members of the Fish Dragon gang could provoke. Perhaps it was because of the leader's warning that although the caravan guards' eyes were burning, none of them dared to flirt with the woman or whistled at her. The caravan slowly moved forward. Suddenly, a rider turned around and galloped over. The handsome young knight stopped his horse a dozen steps away from the man and woman. With a bright smile, he cupped his fists and said to the woman in white, "I'm Chen Jianzhai from the Fish Dragon gang. May I know your name, miss?" "Don't worry, miss, I don't have any evil intentions. It's just that I couldn't stand the instigation of my friends. They made a bet with me that I definitely wouldn't be able to find out Miss's name. If they lost, they would have to treat me to green ant wine for half a year." The handsome young man from the Fish Dragons grinned and said considerately, "Miss, if it's inconvenient for you to tell me your name, just name it. Unfortunately, even though Chen Jianzhai took a step back, the woman was still indifferent. She looked at him calmly, without the shyness of an ordinary girl from the Central Plains facing a lecture, or the anger of a Beiliang girl facing a foreign playboy. In the drizzle, Chen Jianzhai, whose hair was slightly wet, smiled brightly and had no intention of backing down. The young man with a saber who was deliberately ignored by Chen Jianzhai said with a smile, "Her name is Jiang Cabbage, cabbage as in Chinese cabbage." The beautiful woman who was called Cabbage by her companion glared at him and said angrily, "You're Shujizi, persimmon as in rotten persimmon." Chen Jianzhai, who was now a little famous in the Fish Dragon gang, was a little hurt. He thought to himself, "You two seem to be competing with each other, but in the eyes of a bachelor like me, it's more excessive than flirting." The young man who was called a rotten persimmon asked with a smile, "I heard that your gang's leader, Liu Nerong, is going to give up her position to someone else?" Chen Jianzhai's face suddenly became a little dignified. He finally faced the guy who dared to hang a saber without permission. The Fish Dragon Gang, the name was really far-sighted. It was more complicated than all the other 9 sects and gangs in Liang. It gathered nearly 20,000 people in the Jianghu, a behemoth in terms of numbers. Everyone in the Fish Dragon Gang was well aware of it. If the Fish Dragon Gang was not a puppet personally supported by a big shot in Beiliang, it would never have expanded to such an extent today. However, the elders of the Fish Dragon Gang who had followed the old leader to fight for the Jianghu had all retired, and the people in charge had changed. Therefore, there were all kinds of inside stories about the Fish Dragon Gang. Some said that the former Lingju provincial governor, Xu Beiji, had promoted the originally unknown maid of the Fish Dragon Gang to be the empress of Beiliang's Wulin. Some said that the former local emperor of Lingju, the former Huaihua general Zhong Hongwu, had tried to collude with the forces of the Jianghu, but the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, Liu Nerong, had turned against him. She had climbed up Mount Qingliang and used the old general's head as a sign of her allegiance. Nowadays, there were even rumors that Liu Nirong was actually a private pet of Wutong Courtyard. The implication was that Liu Nirong did not have the qualifications to preside over the future of 20,000 men and horses. A large faction could flirt with the government, but she absolutely could not marry into a high family and become a concubine. Therefore, the undercurrent was surging. It was under these circumstances that the news of Liu Nirong's resignation as the gang leader spread. Chen Jianzhai, as a rising star of the 4th batch to join the Fish Dragon Gang, had complicated feelings about this matter. Deep down, he admired the way Liu Nerong treated people, but he also didn't want the Fish Dragon Gang to have too much to do with the government and the border army. The Jianghu was the Jianghu, and the people of the Jianghu would do what the Jianghu did. Otherwise, in the Second Battle of Liangmang, once the war outside the Great Pass was in an emergency, the more than 20,000 people of the Fish Dragon Gang would have to fight for their lives outside the Great Pass. Putting their lives on the line was something that small gangs would do when they had no territory and no money. Now, the Fish Dragon Gang was deeply rooted in Beiliang and vaguely had the momentum of a military town. Moreover, it was located in Lingju, which was far away from the border and had a relatively weak garrison. Chen Jianzhai believed that there would be many people who were active in the Fish Dragon Gang. Chapter 1755. Chen Jianzhai's long silence made the man with the saber laugh. He no longer had the patience to continue waiting. He turned his head and told the woman to go. He squeezed the horse's belly and the two of them rode past Chen Jianzhai. Chen Jianzhai did not stop them from leaving. He slowly turned his horse around and stared at the two figures who were heading into Liangju. They were Hsu Fengnian and Jiang Enai, who had just entered Yuju from outside Jibei Pass. Jiang Enai glanced at Hsu Fengnian without showing any expression. There were many versions of the Fish Dragon Gang's sudden appearance in the Jianghu of the Central Plains. She knew that when he went to Beimang, he seemed to have come out with a group of Fish Dragon Gang members. Hsu Fengnian, who had guessed her thoughts, smiled and said, "When I was young, I didn't have to worry about life and death. When I was younger, I often heard my mother telling me that the girls in the world were cute and pitiful, and that I should take care of them. So, I always thought, why wouldn't I like such a good girl? If I could have her, why wouldn't I? In the past, I really liked to collect the ancient people's rare calligraphy. For example, I spent a lot of money to collect the Tenli spring breeze calligraphy, heavy rain relieving the summer heat calligraphy, high branch autumn cicada calligraphy, and early clear snow calligraphy, this set of calligraphy of the 4 seasons. Even the frost descends calligraphy, this set of calligraphy of the 24 solar terms, was only 3 short. At that time, I only cared about liking the women I liked, and they had to like me. I hoped that they would be like those precious and exclusive copybooks, all in my Wutong courtyard. That way, the copybooks could be preserved well, without wind, rain, and insects, and the women could live without worries, without being homeless. Jiang Genai clicked her tongue and said, I think Jiyu Jiantang was secretly happy when he wanted to help you become the emperor. Once you become the emperor, you will be able to have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. The officials will cry and beg for help in finding concubines, and then they will say that this is inappropriate and happily accept it. What 4 seasons and 20 solar terms posts? Even 100 posts are too few. It was rare that Xu Fengnian did not argue with her. He raised his head and squinted his eyes, as if he was feeling the coolness of the hazy drizzle. He said to himself, later, I found that all the women in the world who are worthy of my affection can live well without me. Perhaps they can even live better without me. No matter how chaotic the world outside Wutong courtyard was, it was not necessarily worse than that small courtyard with no wind or rain and walls on all sides. How could the notes of those inanimate objects? How could he confine them to Wutong courtyard or Qingliang mountain like a pavilion? Tidehark is big, but Jianghu is even bigger. It was only later that I realized that if I could start over again, I would probably still like them in my heart, but I definitely wouldn't flirt with them anymore. For example, Shenyuan Qingfeng of the Great Snow Plains was living a carefree life. Yu Yuwei was also living a carefree life as teacher Ji Shong in Shongyin Academy. But there are some people I do not regret. For example, I brought Chen Yu to Beiliang and saved Zhao Fengya from Grayton City. I did not have any bad thoughts about them. I just wanted them to live for themselves. Jiang Genai said angrily, you are right. But I know that I can't out-talk you. Hsu Fengnian quickly changed the topic. He sighed, if your chessman waiting for the imperial edict could have held real power in Dachu's army earlier, instead of staying in a corner south of Guangling River, my father might not have been able to win the Battle of the Western Wall. At that time, both sides were fighting to see whose last breath was gone first. If Cao Chongqing took over Yi Baikui's position, Dachu's last breath would still be there. This time, my master, Cao Zhongqing, and you were the reason why I was able to come to an agreement with Wang Sui and finally connect the entire Liao, northern Ji, northern Liang, and western regions together. The 3 of you have contributed greatly. Under this situation, Jiaodong Prince Zhao Sui, Huaijidushi Cai Nan, Administrator Han Lin, and Jiju's Deputy General Han Fang will also become important figures. Of course, there are also Yu Luandao, Ku Jianghuai, Xie Shibian, Xu Huang, and other foreigners from Beiliang. As for the Fish Dragon Gang, maybe they will play a role in the future. But if the battle reaches the point where the Fish Dragon Gang needs to go to the battlefield after the young adults in Liuzhu, it means that both sides in Liangmang have suffered great losses. Jiang Genai did not have time to mourn the death of his chessman waiting for the imperial edict. He said worriedly, there are so many barbarians in Beimang. Hsu Fengnian laughed involuntarily. Yes, there are many. But it's not like I don't have a backup plan in Beimang. Just you wait. As long as Beimang can't take Beilu City in one go, I can set their backyard on fire. As a result, Jiang Genai asked an irrelevant question. That Chen Yu, is she very beautiful? Hsu Fengnian grimaced and pretended to be stupid. He did not answer this question. Some words were wrong the moment you opened your mouth. The more you spoke, the more mistakes you would make. Jiang Genai seemed to be talking to himself. How beautiful is this woman who was called a beauty by Yang Ji, who was hiding a mistress in a golden house? If I have the chance, I must pay my respects to her. Alas, I'm afraid I'll feel ashamed when the time comes. Hsu Fengnian suddenly turned his head and said, although I know this request is too much and you won't be happy when you hear it, I still have to say it. If one day I'm not here, you take them away from Beiliang. The farther the better. Jiang Genai's face was full of anger. He said bluntly, "I can't do it." This answer was completely within Hsu Fengnian's expectations. As a result, he did not show any strange expression. Hsu Fengnian rubbed his stubbled chin and said self-mockingly, "When I think about how if I die on the battlefield, I won't be able to see you guys again, I feel very depressed." After teasing, Hsu Fengnian's expression gradually became serious. Wherever there were shining spears and armored horses, there would inevitably be corpses. After this year's spring, at most there would be a relatively peaceful summer. When the autumn wind gradually rose, there would probably be people dying outside Liangju Pass and all of Liuju. It would be too late to collect the corpses. Of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts, apart from the carefree peach blossom sword god Ng Tai, West Chu had Cao Changqing, Beimang had Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Beiliang had Hsu Fengnian. The last 3 were all people who would die if they lost a great battle. At this time, Hsu Fengnian heard the little mud man say something that he would never have thought of even if he cracked his head. Her words were not very auspicious, but her tone was very resolute. "If that day really comes, then wherever Hsu Fengnian's corpse is, I will stand there." Chapter 1756. Hsu Fengnian went back to Mount Qingliang alone. Jiang Genai went to Mount Wudong, saying that he missed the vegetable garden there and that it would be too late if he didn't plant something while there was still some spring rain. Xu Weixiong probably thought that Hsu Fengnian would go to North Resisting Town outside Liangju Pass, so she specially asked Fu Shui Room to send him a letter from home. The meaning was very simple and clear. No matter how urgent the military affairs outside the pass were, Hsu Fengnian had to go back to Mount Qingliang first. This matter was non-negotiable. Xu Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this. Of course, he understood his second sister's good intentions. She was afraid that because he had mustered so many people to bring back the little clay figurine, he would have a guilty conscience and not dare to see Wutong Courtyard's Lu Chengyang, the official consort of Northern Liang Path. In fact, Hsu Fengnian didn't have the idea of hiding from debt. Some things would be a knot in his heart if he didn't talk about it. If he talked about it, there would be a scar in his heart. There was no distinction between good and bad. However, when Hsu Fengnian left Beiliang, he had already thought about how to face Lu Chengyang. He didn't say that Lu Chengyang would be Beiliang's princess consort in the future. When Xu Fengnian walked out of the Wutong Courtyard with her and arrived at the pavilion in the middle of Tidehark Lake, when she heard those 3 words, her smile was tranquil as she gently tossed a handful of bait into the lake. Then Hsu Fengnian, the young king who wasn't afraid of Wang Xianji, the king of Liang, the army of Beimang, and the fearless man who even dared to kill immortals, sat beside her a little uneasily. Lu Chengyang didn't say anything, and he didn't know what to say. The 2 young tiger Kuei desperately rubbed against him. Hsu Fengnian glared at them fiercely. The 2 poor little guys were immediately scared and ran out of the pavilion. However, they didn't want to leave, so they could only lie under the stairs and lazily bask in the sun, waiting for their master to change his mind. Fortunately, the steward of the prince's mansion, Song Yu, helped the king of Beiliang out by saying that the deputy administrator, Song Dongming, had something important to discuss with him. Xu Fengnian felt relieved and took his leave. Lu Chengyang stood up to send him off. She softly said, "Your Highness, you should write another Spring Festival couplet and have someone send it to Mount Wudong. In the future, don't say sorry, it's really not necessary." Hsu Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. Then he smiled. This was probably the taste of a family. He insisted on sending her back to Wutongin first. Along the way, he casually asked his father-in-law about Lu Dongjiang. Lu Chengyang seemed to have gotten over it. Towards the new provincial governor of Liangju, who had broken off their father-daughter relationship with her, there was neither deliberate alienation nor excessive closeness in her words. Hsu Fengnian didn't know how to explain it, mainly because he was afraid that he would paint a snake with legs and draw legs. It was difficult for an upright official to resolve family disputes because the scale of reason and affection were too difficult to grasp. Logically speaking, the Xu family took care of the Lu family in all aspects. However, it was obvious that the Lu family still felt that the in-laws didn't do enough. They never thought that the family's unacclimatized situation in Beiliang was their own fault. Instead, they thought that the support from Mount Qingliang was not enough, and that Lu Chengyang didn't give him enough pillow talk. After sending Lu Chengyang back to Wutonggan, Hsu Fengnian looked at the slender and weak back. He hesitated for a moment and finally made up his mind. Then he followed Song Yu to Song Dongming's government office, which was located halfway up the mountain. Unexpectedly, Song Dongming stood at the door to greet them. After Hsu Fengnian and the deputy administrator of Beiliang took their seats in the government office, Song Dongming told them the reason without waiting for the officials to serve them tea. It turned out that after Lu Dongjiang was promoted to the governor of Liangju, he promoted more than a dozen children of the Lu family to the provincial governor's mansion. Moreover, some of the appointments were related to the fourth-grade official position. They should have been approved by the governor's mansion before they could take effect. However, it seemed that Governor Lu wanted to act first and report later. To be honest, Song Dongming did not nod or shake his head about the resignation of the former governor of Liangju, Tian Peifang, and the filling of the vacancy by Lu Dongjiang. If he were an ordinary official, he would have roughly figured out Deputy Administrator Song's bottom line. Hsu Fengnian was silent. In the final analysis, the crux of the problem was not the Liangju officialdom, which had just changed parents, or even Lu Chengyang and Lu Dongjiang. It was Hsu Fengnian himself. In the past 2 years, he did not have a good impression of the Lu family. However, when he did not make a clear statement on many things, no one in Beiliang could understand his thoughts. Therefore, they could only tolerate and compromise. Especially when they recruited the children of the Lu family to be officials with real power in Beicheng, the officialdom of Beiliang naturally did not dare to underestimate the Lu family. Especially when Lu Dongjiang was unexpectedly promoted, it undoubtedly fueled the arrogance of the Lu family. Song Dongming's expression was calm, but he could not help but feel a little depressed. Originally, he wanted to make friends with Lu Dongjiang. He did not expect that this famous scholar of Qingju, who was famous in the Central Plains, would be so insatiable that he might disrupt the situation in Liangju. Song Dongming knew that Bai Yu was against Lu Dongjiang's appointment as the provincial governor of Liangju. Therefore, Lu Dongjiang's action was tantamount to a silent slap to Song Dongming's face. Presumably, Bai Yu was watching the fire burn across the river. Hsu Fengnian sighed and did not say much to Song Dongming. He only said that the 3 appointments were temporarily put aside at the administrator's manor. He would personally go to the Liangju provincial governor's manor. Then, Hsu Fengnian changed the topic. He said with a smile that Administrator Li Gongda had also submitted his resignation, only keeping the post of Northern Supervisor. Then, Li Gongda recommended Song Dongming to be the second administrator in Beiliang's history. Song Dongming did not agree. He only said that Beiliang still needed Li Gongda, an experienced and reputable local official, to be the administrator. Otherwise, now that the provincial governors of Liangling and Yuliu had been replaced by foreigners, if Song Dongming were to be promoted to administrator, it would be one disaster after another. It was inevitable that the local scholars of Beiliang would resent him. Hsu Fengnian did not press the issue. He only said that Song Dongming should think it over. After leaving the Yamen, Hsu Fengnian went to the Liangju provincial governor's manor with a light carriage and a simple entourage. Sitting in the carriage, Hsu Fengnian's fingers unconsciously stroked the jade pendant with a dragon's tail hanging from his waist. It was not strange that Song Dongming would give up the position of administrator. Bai Yu, who had arrived in Beiliang later than Song Dongming, was now in a low position in Mount Qingliang. This Mr. White Lotus did not have a prominent official status, but he had gathered a group of like-minded young talents around him. Bai Yu only lacked a status. Once Song Dongming vacated the position of deputy administrator, there was no doubt that Bai Yu would take it. Obviously, in Song Dongming's eyes, the position of deputy administrator was like a dangerous pass. He could not give it to Bai Yu, who was eyeing it covetously. Otherwise, Bai Yu, who was justified, would truly rise in Beiliang's officialdom. Song Dongming was determined to sit in the position of deputy administrator for another 2 or 3 years. At that time, as long as the Battle of Liangmang came to an end, Beiliang's civil and military officials would reward him based on his contributions. Bai Yu, who did not have enough status, would not be a threat to him in the future. Hsu Fengnian smiled knowingly. He had no intention of exposing Song Dongming's dark thoughts. In fact, this was a good thing. It meant that Song Dongming was showing signs of taking root in Beiliang. As for whether he would treat Bai Yu unfairly, Hsu Fengnian did not care. Speaking of which, if Song Dongming could really provoke Bai Yu's competitive spirit, it would be a great thing for Beiliang. Chapter 1757. When Hsu Fengnian's figure appeared outside the gate of the provincial governor's mansion, the officials were scared witless. They hurriedly opened the gate to welcome the king of Beiliang. Hsu Fengnian walked in quickly. Soon, he saw 20 to 30 officials from the provincial governor's mansion surrounding Lu Dongjiang, who was wearing a purple robe. Hsu Fengnian dismissed them with a smile. According to the law, the provincial governor of Liang was a grade 3 official. His official patch should be embroidered peacock. However, the provincial governor of Liangju of Beiliang had always been half a grade higher than that of Yuju and Lingju, which was a grade 2 official. This had long been reported and filed by the Ministry of Personnel of the Liang Imperial Court. However, none of the provincial governors of Liangju of Beiliang dared to openly wear the official robe embroidered with a grade 2 golden pheasant. This was the rule of the Liang officialdom. Therefore, there was an insurmountable gap between the purple-robed official robe and the red-robed official robe. In the Grand Peace City, taking the minister of Shangshu province as an example, the minister of the 6 ministries was a grade 2 official. However, most of the left and right assistant ministers of the 6 ministries were grade 3 officials and were still not allowed to wear the purple robe. During the reign of Yonghui, only the left assistant ministers of the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Army were grade 2 officials. After the Xiangfu incident, not only were the right assistant ministers of the 2 ministries promoted to grade 2, even the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights promoted to grade 2 this year. Lu Dongjiang could be regarded as the first provincial governor of Beiliang to wear the purple robe official robe. He was also one of the few high-grade provincial governors in the territory of Liang. If Hsu Fengnian remembered correctly, in today's world, only the top officials of Liangju of Beiliang, Qingju of Jinggan, Tangju of Nanjiang, and Yuju of the southern border of the capital region were grade 2 officials. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that Lu Dongjiang was the third person of the civil officials of Beiliang, only under the Minister of War and the Deputy Minister of War. The sudden meeting was full of laughter and joy. Whether it was the old faces in the Liangju provincial governor's office or the dozen new faces with the surname Lu, they were all relieved to see the young vassal king with a gentle smile. If Great Peace City was the foot of the Zhao family, then Liangju was the door of the Shu family. The position of provincial governor of Liangju had been vacant for many years. The position of provincial governor of Liangju was actually equivalent to provincial governor. The position of general of Liangju had always been held by the protector general of Beiliang. After Tian Peifang was promoted from provincial governor of Yuju to provincial governor of Liangju, she did not make any changes. She advocated non-interference governance. Lu Dongjiang changed the previous position and pushed out dozens of Lu family members at once. In addition, Shi Fu, who had been silent for many years, became the general of Liangju. Fortunately, after the Wang Ye's conversation today, both the new and old officials of the provincial governor's manor expressed his affirmation. He named 7 or 8 people and praised them. He had high hopes for the new people and had an appreciative attitude towards the old people. As for the 2 sides that were at daggers drawn, there was no stick, only dates, and there was no favoritism. This made the old people of the provincial governor's manor shed tears of gratitude. They were really worried that after Lu Dongjiang became the head of the manor, it would not be enough to stuff a dozen people of the Lu family into the manor. He would not stop until they were all on the cold bench. Once the Wang Ye tacitly approved of this, then even the gods would not be able to save their official careers. For some reason, after seeing the king with their own eyes today, they were angry at the Lu family. As a result, the old officials of the provincial governor's office, who also had a lot of silent criticism of Mount Qingliang, suddenly felt their anger vanish. It was probably because the young king's appearance as he sat on the chair and talked cheerfully and wittily made people involuntarily revere him. In the end, Hsu Fengnian had a private chat with his father-in-law, Lu Dongjiang. Outsiders did not know what the young king said, but they only saw that the provincial governor's face, which was full of smiles, was becoming more and more radiant. Afterwards, Lu Dongjiang took the initiative to retract a few of the illegal orders and comforted the clansmen. He promised that in less than 3 years, each of them would have great wealth. Not only that, for the first time, Lu Dongjiang sternly warned everyone that they had to be more restrained in this period of time and not bring disgrace to the Lu family's reputation. Other than giving the clan a reassurance, Lu Dongjiang also removed 3 members of the Lu family from the genealogy overnight. From that moment on, Lu Dongjiang finally had some of the air of the head of the Lu family. When Bai Yu drunkenly walked out of a secluded mansion, he suddenly saw a carriage lift the curtain. He paused and then strode over. Getting on the carriage, he sat in the carriage. Facing the young man, Sir White Lotus was calm and composed. Hsu Fengnian, who had come to Beiliang's deputy provincial governor's mansion to pick him up, joked, "Sir White Lotus, are you not afraid of provoking public anger?" Because of his eyesight problem, Bai Yu habitually squinted to look at people. He smiled and said, "I can't do anything to the hot stove, but Prince won't allow me to do anything to the cold stove." Hsu Fengnian laughed involuntarily and changed the topic. Li Gongda said that he wants to resign from the position of administrator, and Yuju provincial governor Hu Kuei also wants to enter the border army. Does Sir White Lotus have any thoughts? If you do, you can say it directly. Bai Yu was not afraid and said directly, "Prince, tell me your thoughts first," and of course, Deputy Administrator Song's thoughts. Hsu Fengnian also said bluntly, "My original intention was to let Sir Song be promoted to administrator and you fill in the position of deputy administrator. But Sir Song said that there are already too many foreign provincial governors in Beiliang, so there should not be another administrator." Bai Yu leaned lazily against the wall of the carriage and sneered, "Oh? That's simple. After Administrator Li resigns, Sir Song will be his official administrator, and the new provincial governor of Liangju, Lu Dongjiang, will be the deputy administrator. Then, Lingzhou's Song Yang, who is from Beiliang, will be the provincial governor of Yuju. As for the provincial governor of Liangju..." At this point, Bai Yu extended his finger and pointed at himself. "If not me, then who?" Hsu Fengnian was silent. Bai Yu smiled and said, "Beiliang's arrangement is to make things difficult for Sir Song. But if I ask for a smaller position and run to Yuju to be the provincial governor and no longer be an official under Sir Song's eyes, it will make things difficult for Prince." Bai Yu stopped smiling. "In fact, the most suitable candidate to be the provincial governor of Liangju is not me, but the former provincial governor of Lingju, Xu Beiji. Rest assured, Prince, no matter what, I will not be the deputy administrator or the provincial governor." Hsu Fengnian was puzzled. "Then what will Sir do?" Bai Yu raised a corner of the curtain and hung it on the hook. A cool breeze blew against his face and brought some coolness to the carriage. Bai Yu sighed. "The key is not what I think, but how bold Prince is." Hsu Fengnian was even more puzzled. "Sir, what do you mean?" Bai Yu said in a low voice, "Beiliang's land is narrow and is old history. Right now, it has the vast western regions, including the 4th province, Liuju. Adding on a 5th province outside Liangju, with Fengbei City as the fulcrum, it will be enough to accomplish great things." Hsu Fengnian's heart trembled. He said calmly, "The imperial court will not agree to Beiliang occupying 5 provinces." Bai Yu smiled. "Now that things have come to this, do we still need the imperial court to agree? I inadvertently saw some hastily changed border army deployments. Yuju, which was originally destined to be a spectator in the Second Battle of Liang Mang, suddenly became important again. Why? Dare I ask the 2 Huais Cai, Nan, Han Lin, the northern Mang's Wang Sui, and the 2 Liao's Jiu Jiantang, how many of these 3 groups of people did Wang Ye see when he led his troops out of the border? How many people did you negotiate with? And how many people did Prince negotiate with in the north and south of Beimang?" The string of questions caused Hsu Fengnian's expression to change slightly. Bai Yu did not expect to get an answer. He seemed to be talking to himself. A certain person is the emperor. I, by you, will be an official no matter where I am. It is all good. Hsu Fengnian did not answer the question. Our scholars in Beiliang want to be an official, and they want it so righteously. I am very happy. Bai Yu's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the still blurry face and smiled slightly. If Prince wants all the scholars in the world to not have to bow and scrape, I will be happy. I am also very happy. Hsu Fengnian said emotionally, I am afraid the people of the world will not be happy. Bai Yu sneered and said, just one family will not be happy. Hsu Fengnian was shocked. Bai Yu said, maybe Prince will find it strange why I, Bai Yu, have changed my mind. It is actually very simple. I recently understood something. A certain person may be the emperor for 30 to 40 years, at most 50 to 60 years. But it may be enough for the world to have 200 years of peace and good weather. It is very impressive. Hsu Fengnian looked at this elegant scholar in white robes. Just like when Xu Xiao saw Zhao Changling in the past. Both of them wanted to support the dragon. Chapter 1758. Hsu Fengnian had an additional nameless young attendant by his side. He rode a horse and wore armor, but he did not carry a cold saber or crossbow. He was serious in speech and manner and had a lot on his mind. Hsu Fengnian traveled all the way to the north. He did not deliberately win over this talented young man. It was not that he did not want to, but it was meaningless. Whether Hsu Fengnian talked to him about the national interest or high official position and generous salary, it all seemed ridiculous and comical. This was because his name was Xie Shibian, Cao Changqing's favorite disciple. He was one of the twin jade annulus of Da Chu who stood out during the Guangling Taoist War. Most of the students of Da Chu were now placed in the major academies of Lingju, far away from the troublesome places. Only Xie Shibian proposed to go to Beiliang Pass to take a look. Of course, Hsu Fengnian would not refuse. He now somewhat understood the mentality of the late emperor of Liang, Zhao Dun, and Chen Zhibao. Some people, even if they could not be used, as long as they were by his side, they would be like a devastatingly beautiful woman standing in front of his eyes, equally pleasing to the eye. And to be fair, compared to Ku Jianghuai, who was unruly and unbridled, the gentle, respectful, and thrifty Xie Shibian made Hsu Fengnian feel more at ease. Getting along with Ku Jianghuai was like drinking a large bowl of strong wine. It was delightful, but he had to worry about whether or not he would get drunk. Getting along with Xie Shibian was like drinking a small cup of tea. It did not hurt his stomach, and he did not have a headache. Along the way, Hsu Fengnian would only greet Xie Shibian when he received a spy report from the Fushirai Fang. The spy reports were mostly from the higher-ups of the Liang imperial court. After Xie Shibian finished reading them, he kept them one by one. Every time he received a piece of paper, it often meant that Da Chu had lost a battle line, or that several cities had fallen. Xie Shibian only became more and more taciturn, and there was no obvious change in his expression. One by one, familiar generals of Da Chu were beheaded and became the military exploits of Liang's leading generals. One by one, familiar names chose to surrender to Liang. The territory that Da Chu controlled became smaller and smaller. Wu Zhongshuan, Lu Shengxiang, Song Li, and even Xu Gong and Yuan Tingshan appeared more and more in the court reports. Da Chu's power was gone, and this was undoubtedly the end. The last court report was to inform the world that the Emperor of Liang would personally lead the army to the West Chu rampart in the beginning of summer. At the same time, he issued an edict that as long as the rebel armies of Da Chu gave up resistance, the imperial army would not kill a single person on the battlefield. The people of Guangling Road would still all see them as Liang people. As they approached the North Jebei city, Hsu Fengnian received a concise spy report from the Gerfalcon's Claw. This time, he did not pass on the military intelligence to Xie Shibian, but the latter rode his horse over with a gloomy expression. He wanted to say something but stopped. Hsu Fengnian did not wear any armor. Instead, he wore a simple and elegant scholar's robe. He only wore a cold knife and a dragon-patterned jade pendant. He slowed down his horse and turned to Xie Shibian, saying, after Cao Changqing died, he scattered his fate energy into Guangling Road. You are not a qi cultivator nor a martial artist of the celestial state. Perhaps you do not understand the deeper meaning of this. To put it simply, from the moment of Cao Changqing's death, Guangling Road's fate energy, which had not been completely extinguished by the Jiang family of Da Chu, began to truly belong to the territory of Liang. If Liang did not deal with it properly and started a massacre on the battlefield, or continued to make things difficult for Guangling on the issue of taxes, then it was very likely that Guangling Road would retaliate. Although the possibility of Yang King Zhao Bing rebelling immediately was not high, it was not completely impossible for him to take over Guangling. Therefore, Cao Changqing's death left a way out for the people of Guangling. No matter who they belong to, those who succeed must treat them well. Xie Shibian murmured, seeking benevolence and obtaining benevolence, seeking justice and obtaining justice. The two words obtaining justice sounded pleased. At this point, Xie Shibian lowered his head, his lips trembling. Hsu Fengnian could only somewhat awkwardly console him. General Xie, I do not dare to have extravagant hopes that you will enter the Beiliang frontier army. After all, in name, we are fighting against Beimang and guarding the country for the Zhao family of Liang. But regardless of the outcome of the war in Liangmang, I will guarantee the safety of your 500 people in West Chu. No matter how chaotic the world is, if I, Hsu Fengnian, want to keep your 500 people in peace, I can still do it. Xie Shibian turned a deaf ear to him, his face full of sorrow, muttering to himself, when I was young and studying, every time I flipped through a book and read Taibai's poetry, I read that kind of grand and magnificent writing of a flourishing age. I always had an infinite yearning. Something like I must drink 300 cups of wine in one go, something like the immortal waved his hand for me, as if listening to Amaze 10,000 Valleys pine trees. I really felt that if I stretched my neck and shouted it out loud, it still would not be enough to satisfy me. But at that time, the teacher always said that Taibai's poetry talent was too high, that the immortal's aura was too strong, that it was as if it was 30,000 feet above the earth, but it might not be the best poetry in the world. The older the scholar, the more experienced he was. Instead, he would be more open to old Du's simple poetry. I wonder how many souls I summon when I close my eyes. Deep in the battlefield at night, the bright moon shines on the white bones. It was really simple and straightforward. Where did the boundless talent come from? But reading it now, it's really. Xie Shibian was already choking with sobs. He raised his arm and wiped his cheeks with all his strength. This was perhaps the difference between Xie Shibian and Ku Jianghuai. The latter's experience of life and death was not as profound as the experience of honor and disgrace. Xie Shibian's will would be depressed, while Ku Jianghuai would be full of vigor. Hsu Fengnian looked toward the dusty Jibaicheng and said, General Xie, from Jibaicheng to Qinghe, and then to Huayang Pass, Liuya and Fuling, 2 towns, you can go anywhere. I will arrange for people to accompany you. If you want to see the 2 cavalry units outside Liangju Pass, it won't be a problem. Xie Shibian had already regained his composure. He nodded and said, Thank you, Wang Ye. Chapter 1759. Hsu Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. Suddenly thinking about the situation in the Liang court, Hsu Fengnian's mood was somewhat heavy. West Chu no longer had the ability to rise from the ashes. As a result, Zhong Julu and Yuan Benx's inner court matter had come to an end. Song Dongming and Bai Yu both believed that the Liang Imperial Court would allow Wu Zhongshuan to return to Tian City, and that Song Li, who had previously been in charge of the Eastern Front, and one of Wu Zhongshuan's generals, would be promoted together, becoming the 2 new leaders of the Guangling military. Jiju General Yuan Tingshan might not be able to return to the border, but would remain on the north bank of the Guangling River near Jinggan Road. His 10,000 Yangbao private elite cavalry would be used to intimidate the Yang King Zhao Bing's southern army. As for the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Xu Gong, he would most likely lead his troops into Jiju to help the administrator Han Lin impede Jidushi Cai Nan, and to a certain extent, monitor the Beiliang cavalry. However, Xu Gong's subsequent official title was a bit more complicated. Would he continue to patrol the border as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, or would he directly become the deputy Jidushi and Jiju general? However, the movement that was truly worthy of Beiliang's attention was the departure or stay of the Southern Expedition Commander Lu Shengxiang. Regarding this, Qing Liangshan and the Beiliang Governor-General had different opinions. The former believed that Lu Shengxiang would remain in the Liang imperial court for a period of time, while the latter believed that Lu Shengxiang would control all of the court's current field battle forces and advance north, eventually stationing himself in the area between Jeju and the two Liao provinces. His forces would reach 80,000 to 90,000, forming a three-point line of defense with Cai Nan, Shu Gong, Jiyu Zhentang, and Zhao Sui. This would force Beimang to make the decision to fight the Second Great War of Liang Mang. As long as this delicate situation was formed, with Shu Gong and Lu Shengxiang, these two generals, stationing themselves in the northern border, not to mention Jiyu Zhentang's plan, the use of Jeju's Deputy General Han Fang as a hidden chess piece would be greatly reduced. In the end, Liang had too many people and even more soldiers that could be used. There were only two people who could influence or even change the situation in the Central Plains, the Prince of Shu Chen Jibao and the Prince of Yang Kai Jiao Bing. Now it all depended on whether or not these two were willing to obediently return to the territory of the Prince of Yang, or how quickly they left Guangling Road. As long as one of them dilly-dallied, then Lu Shengxiang would not be able to withdraw from Guangling Road. After all, a general under Wu Zhongshuan and Song Li was already very difficult to stabilize Guangling after the war. Furthermore, it was impossible for there to be no conflict of interest between the two sides. Without Lu Shengxiang, a high-ranking general from the spring and autumn period, once the situation changed, the court would not be at ease. If these were the long-term considerations of Beiliang, then Beiliang's immediate concern was the stability of the Beimang imperial court. Dong Zhuo had actually kept his position as the king of the South Courtyard. Although Hsu Fengnian had essentially killed off any signs of Dong Zhuo controlling the sky with one hand in Beimang, this was tantamount to letting go of Dong Zhuo, who had nowhere else to go. In the next battle, Dong Zhuo would not hesitate to take desperate measures. If it was said that in the first battle, then in the next battle, it was very likely that Dong Zhuo would throw caution to the wind. If necessary, even his private army of the Dong Zhuo would be wiped out. Xie Shibian had already gone far away. Hsu Fengnian did not enter the city to patrol. Even the white horse Yizong did not accompany him. He walked alone by the gradually rising river. His boots stepped on the lush green and soft grass, making a small sound. Hsu Fengnian sat on the shore and looked at the river, lost in thought. Outside the Liangju Pass, there was Chu Lushan's Beiliang Protectorate. Li Gongda led a large group of civil officials to supervise the construction of the new city. Everyone knew what to do, and they all did a good job. This made Hsu Fengnian, the nominal leader of the Beiliang cavalry, a burden. This was especially so before the war began. In fact, Hsu Fengnian's existence was more like a flag, standing tall on the northwest border, announcing to the Liang imperial court and the Beimang army that the four provinces of Beiliang were not to be trifled with. Hsu Fengnian subconsciously pulled up a strand of wild grass beside him, brushed off the soil, and put it in his mouth to chew. After the earthy smell, there were wisps of sweetness. After Huang Longshe died silently somewhere in the southeast, Miss He returned to Beiliang and said a lot of strange things she heard from the top 3 grades of spring and autumn. Hsu Fengnian only understood half of some of it, and he was confused about some of it. Some of it made him yearn for it, and some of it made him disappointed. Miss He said that in the future, in the Central Plains, the merchants and entertainers would be more eye-catching in the eyes of the common people than the officials in the imperial court. She said that in the future, no one would be able to see the status of the emperor. This year, it was my turn. As long as the world was not peaceful, as long as I had military power in my hands, I could proclaim myself a king. I might even be able to become the founding emperor. She also said that in the future, scholars would value profits more than fame, so it would be very difficult for there to be a true imperial tutor. Hsu Fengnian could not imagine that world. He remembered that his master, Li Yishan, used only 3 words to persuade Xu Xiao not to rebel and not to divide the river with Liang. Fame, words, and deeds. The meaning was very simple. If the name was not right, the words would not be right. If the words were not right, the deed would not be done. In the late spring and autumn period where Xu Xiao lived, the most important thing was a person's foundation. Did the emperor, the king, the general, and the minister have the guts? The answer was, of course, yes. But what was interesting was that before the Great Qin, in the era where hundreds of schools of thought contended and nomads roamed freely, the answer was no. No matter if it was saints, generals, or ministers, it did not matter one's birth. In that brilliant era, when there were generations of sages, it was as if everyone was a dragon. When nomads became gentry, and then grew into powerful families, especially after the Great Feng dynasty chose only Confucianism, the rules of the world were set firmly. The sons and grandsons of the nobility all wore yellow and purple, and the peasants spent their entire lives crawling and fighting in the fields. All of this only changed after Zhongjulu took control of the Liang court. The imperial examinations were greatly promoted, and the poor scholars who had fought for hundreds of years for the sake of rules finally took the opportunity to rise. Many scholars from poor families were like carps that jumped over the dragon gate. In the late days of the Great Feng dynasty, there was a system of entering the emperor's hall. The two were similar but also very different. Because the latter could only speak for the master, while the former could speak for the world. So Hsu Fengnian remembered very clearly that even if his master, Li Yishan, did not talk about what he knew in the first half of his life, in the latter half of his life at Tide Listening Pavilion, he was not willing to compare himself with Zhao Changling, Yuan Bengxi, and the others. Instead, he had always paid attention to the various reforms of that blue-eyed person from Liang. Hsu Fengnian had unknowingly chewed up the weed and spat out the residue. He stood up and exhaled deeply. Since he did not need to criticize the construction of North Qianbei City, he might as well loaf around for a while. Hsu Fengnian suddenly disappeared from the river and rushed north. During this time, he saw the main force of the right cavalry changing camps according to their deployment. He saw the silhouette of Huayang Pass. In the end, Hsu Fengnian appeared in the dilapidated Tiger Head City. This former first city of Liang Pass had suffered great damage after Dongzhuo's wanton attacks for several months. Before retreating, most of the buildings in the city had been burned down. It was like a desolate tomb. The repair progress was extremely slow. Coupled with the occasional raid by Beimang's elite cavalry, even Chu Lushan, who had a special attachment to Tiger Head City, had to give up his energy. In the night, Hsu Fengnian sat cross-legged on the battlements of the city. He looked at the Longyang plain outside the city and closed his eyes. He could vaguely hear the whistling of giant rocks after 1,000 catapults were fired at the same time. He could vaguely hear the horse hooves of the cavalry charging to their deaths. He could vaguely hear the laughter and drinking of a large group of captains when he first entered the city, including Liu Jianyu. The entire city had died in battle. Their fellow soldiers had died in the same cave. It was said that after Dongzhuo breached the city, he did not whip the corpses of the Beimang soldiers to vent his anger. He also did not build a Jingguan temple. He only walked up to the top of the city and used his hand to lift the flag with the word Shu that was already on the verge of falling. Later on, the Beimang Empress ordered Dongzhuo to exchange Liu Jianyu's corpse for Yang Yuanzhan's. Hsu Fengnian did not hesitate in the slightest. Not only did he agree to place Yang Yuanzhan's head and corpse in a coffin, he even handed over 5 or 6 more heads of Beimang generals. At the start, in Xiaoguang City's Yuju Conference Hall, there was an irascible general who was cursing on the spot. If it were not for Hsu Fengnian's secret letter and the young vassal king standing there, those generals probably would have cursed even if they had to lose their official status. Yang Wanwan's expression was also unsightly. She clearly thought that the king of Beiliang was showing weakness to the Beimang barbarians. How could there be a man in the world who would express goodwill to the defeated general after winning a battle? At that time, the entire Yuju border army was about to explode. Only after Chu Lushan sent a sternly worded secret letter to Xiaoguang City did the commotion subside. Hsu Fengnian opened his eyes and said softly, "Liu Jianyu, Ma Jili, Chu Hanqing, everyone in Hutu City, I'm sorry. I forgot to bring wine this time. However, I think the blood of the 300,000 Beimang soldiers is the best wine." Hsu Fengnian clenched his fists and placed them on his knees. He leaned forward and gazed toward the distant north. He smiled and said, "I, Hsu Fengnian, promise everyone here that Beiliang will offer you 1,000,000 cups of this wine." Chapter 1760. The Huairou enclosure was famous for its beautiful scenery in the southern Beimang dynasty. It had always been the first choice of summer vacation for the people of the spring and autumn period. The A and B families all had a grassland here as a demonstration of their family's heritage. For example, the Wang family of the southern dynasty, which originally did not have the right to occupy a place here, obtained a vassal land here at the beginning of spring this year. Regardless of whether it was the marriage with the A family or the great-grandson of the century-old man becoming the winter abbot, the Wang family, which was once known as the Han Academy in the Central Plains for 10 generations, finally showed signs of prosperity. As summer entered, more and more large horses and embroidered clothes appeared in Huairou enclosure. That was why when a group of 30 riders appeared at the edge of the enclosure, it didn't stir up too much of a commotion. Some of the southern court's disciples who were brandishing their whips and urging their horses on gave each other a look. The carriage escorted by the riders left behind 2 long wheel tracks on the grassy ground. The carriage that was originally spacious with 3 people inside now seemed a bit cramped. This was all thanks to that young and robust fatty. He sat there like a small mountain, currently resting with his eyes closed, a Northern Mang border army standard war blade resting on his knees. The other man and woman's appearances were a bit similar, likely brother and sister. Compared to the coarse young man, the woman had a bit more of a graceful and luxurious aura. Her looks couldn't be considered all that outstanding, but her figure was extremely good. As she sat there, her curves were exquisite, just like a blooming plump peony. Right now, the woman was currently reprimanding the younger brother who avoided her many times. The latter was cowering in fear, from time to time sending a pleading look towards the robust fatty. The woman couldn't stand her younger brother's cowardly appearance the most, so the anger within her surged even more, her heavy chest continuously trembling. She actually directly slapped her younger brother's face, the sound loud and clear. The younger brother, who was now already a high-ranking officer in Northern Mang Army, still didn't dare show the slightest sign of retorting, his head drooping, feeling wronged and nervous. When he heard that slap, the fatty finally couldn't help but say, "Eldest wife, that's enough. Since Yelu Hongzai didn't die at the mouth of the gourd, he definitely won't die on Northern Liang's side." It was fine if the fatty was quietly cultivating the vow of silence, but the moment he said that, the woman immediately vented her anger. "Dongzhua, you still have the nerve to plead for him? If you did not insist on him leading the Dong family's private army to the mouth of the calabash to rescue young Yuanzhan, would my brother be in danger? I have been running errands for you in Norland all these years. I helped you put in a good word for you in front of the governors and generals. Just to let you send my brother to his death. If you have the ability, why don't you lead the Dong family's cavalry to intercept the 2 Beiliang cavalry units?" The king of the king's palace of the Beimang South Courtyard, King, frowned and did not say a word. The fatty did not speak. For some reason, the unreasonable woman immediately felt a little guilty. The arrogance of a noble immediately disappeared. She turned her head and did not dare to look at her man. Yelu Hongzai said angrily, "Sister, brother-in-law, why are you quarreling over me? It's not worth it. Sister, why don't you beat me up? Last time, it's not brother-in-law's fault." Brother-in-law said to ignore the Eastern Front Army at the mouth of the calabash if the situation is bad. I was hot-blooded and led brother-in-law's cavalry into the mouth of the calabash, causing brother-in-law to lose thousands of men. The woman snorted and glared at Yelu Hongzai. Her face was full of anger. "If you die at the mouth of the calabash in Yuju, do you want our father to give birth to another son? At that time, won't our father resent your brother-in-law? Your brother-in-law originally did not have a firm foothold in the southern dynasty. After the war went badly, not only was the crown prince ready to make a move, but he also secretly roped in the civil and military officials of the southern dynasty led by Huang Songpu. Especially those remnants of the northern dynasty who are not familiar with him, they are all relying on him. Now, even Yelu Dongchuang has returned to the royal court. In the circle of the grassland bigwigs, he is constantly hitting your brother-in-law when he is down. If you die, how good will your brother-in-law be?" Fatty Dong rolled his eyes. Yelu Hongzai held back his laughter and looked up with a mischievous smile. "Sister, after all is said and done, you are still siding with brother-in-law. Those remnants of the spring and autumn period are indeed better at reasoning than us. No wonder they say that a married woman is like spilled water. The woman's face was slightly red. She raised her hand and was about to hit him. Yelu Hongsai quickly leaned back against the wall of the carriage and made a face. Chapter 1761. Dongzhuo sighed. During this period of time, he felt as if he was being roasted on a stove. Although the emperor had magnanimously tolerated his defeat and had no intention of changing his tune, Dongzhuo was well aware that when he became the king of Shangnan Academy, he had already used up all of the affection he had accumulated over the years on the battlefield. If he had seized the opportunity to win the Battle of Liangmang, it would naturally be a great thing to return the favor. Over time, the affection he had for his subordinates would increase instead of decrease. Unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. Beimang had suffered a crushing defeat outside the Beiliang Pass. In truth, the Battle of Liangju, where he had personally mobilized his troops, had been a situation in which his side had the absolute advantage. Liuju had been a Pyrrhic victory for Beiliang. Moreover, with the participation of Liu Gui and Tuoba, the loss could not be considered a loss. It could even be said that the regretful outcome of the Battle of Liuju had coincidentally served as a foil to Dongzhuo's strength on the central front. However, the Beiliang cavalry had staked everything on one throw and caused the complete annihilation of great General Yang Yuanzhan's army, which had practically wiped out all of Dongzhuo's painstaking efforts. Even now, Dongzhuo still had to face the frenzied impeachment of Yang Yuanzhan's former subordinates. Who did not know that at that time, Beimang had viewed the Eastern Front as an expedition to the south to obtain military merits? With so many of the nobles of the northern and southern dynasties dead in one go, how could Dongzhuo not become a rat despised by Beimang? What worried Dongzhuo the most was not the nobles seeking revenge for the deaths of their juniors, but the old woman's aging and discouragement. That aging was not only the advancement of age, but also the loss of spirit. Originally, when Dongzhuo saw her, she was an old woman who still had the confidence to personally witness the annexation of the Central Plains. The last time he saw her, she had already become an old woman who no longer had the extravagant hope of seeing the Guangling River in Liang. Fight Beiliang or the two Liao provinces? Previously, in all of Beimang, there were actually only 3 people who said that they wanted to fight Beiliang: himself, Dongzhuo, the emperor, and the typing decree of the chess and sword music school. But in the end, it was still the old woman who had the final say. That was why Dongzhuo had been on tenterhooks at that time. After the emperor had comforted this subordinate of hers, she had secretly summoned Wang Sui, who had appeared out of nowhere. It seemed that Wang Sui also insisted on conquering northern Liang first, then swallowing Shujiao, and then entering the Central Plains in the east. This made the emperor decide to fight a second war with northern Liang. Dongzhuo was rather glad about this, but he also felt a little uneasy. Wang Sui didn't want to fight Jiyu Jiantang, who had destroyed his country, but wanted to compete with Ren Tu's son. Dongyue's son-in-law Wang Sui didn't have any relationship with Beimang, so it didn't make any sense. Dongzhuo clenched his teeth out of habit, his face gloomy. At this very moment, that northern Mang Golden Branch and Jade Leaf who had previously flared up at him saw that her man was deeply worried, so she didn't dare to continue being unforgiving. In the end, she was on his side. Most women in the world were willing to follow their husbands after marriage. Moreover, in her heart, Dongzhuo had always been an indomitable hero, a great flood dragon with the hope of becoming a dragon in the world. She had chosen Dongzhuo back then, and the woman with the pseudonym Fan Bainu had flirted with the little Beiliang Tu Chen Jibao. The notorious Princess Hongyang of Yuto Province seemed to have some connection with the king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian. Now, she was recklessly advocating going south to Liao. The carriage slowly came to a stop. Dongzhuo alighted and looked at the elegant courtyard that made him feel like he was in Jiangnan of the Central Plains. The white walls, black tiles, and willow trees swayed gently. The courtyard wasn't big, and it wasn't famous in the Huairou enclosure. However, the 2 guests in the courtyard today held important positions in Beimang. Dongzhuo and Dongzhuo were both authoritative figures in the southern court who could shake the officialdom with a stomp of their feet. Dongzhuo had always minded his own business with the 2 of them, but now he had no choice but to come. It was obvious that Dong Zhuo was in an awkward position in the southern court. Dong Zhuo suddenly missed his wife, the fifth fox, and of course, that innocent little girl, Dao Manwu. Then, Dong Zhuo, his wife, and Yelu Hongcai walked into the courtyard together. They saw Murong Baoding, who was appraising the half-faced Buddha, as well as the Zhong father and son, Zhong Shentong and Zhong Tan. At the same time, the Beimang crown prince secretly brought along the androgynous and handsome young man of unknown identity. Similarly, they were having a private meeting with a few important figures that couldn't be exposed. As for Yelu Dongchuang, who had returned to Beimang from Liang Lake with the broken spear Deng Mao, he was having a secret meeting with the leader of the Ruran cavalry, Hong Jingyan. As for the Beimang war god, Tuoba, he had once again rushed alone to the icy plains of the extreme north. He used an iceberg that never melted as a ferry to continue his journey north. There were fish in the northern underworld. In the Beimang imperial palace, an old woman was walking aimlessly. The eunuchs and palace maids only dared to follow her from a distance. She browsed through them one by one and seemed to remember many things from the past. Finally, she arrived at the square outside the main hall. The head of the piece of Beimang had been waiting there for a long time. Before the old woman approached the head of the piece, she gave a young palace maid a strange order. The palace maid was at a loss at first, then she quickly left. The two of them walked up the stairs together. She actually knew many things that many people thought she didn't know. She didn't say it, but that didn't mean she tacitly agreed. The first thing she said was unexpected. Our Beimang seems to have a lot of Yelu Hongcai and Yelu Hongcai. It's the same among the important figures. They always give their names so casually. Teacher, if we conquer the Central Plains and read more books, will we not be so careless? The head of the piece smiled and nodded. After the old woman reached the top of the stairs, she turned and looked towards the south. She extended a palm and then bent her fingers one by one. That crown prince of ours who became ambitious overnight, that pair of grandfather and grandson who share the same surname as the late emperor, and the head of the piece who shares the same clan as me. These three parties have already divided up half of my Beimang. The old woman bent her last two fingers. With the two of us, Beimang is gone. The head of the piece was silent. She laughed self-deprecatingly. That fatty Dong is capable, but his fate is not very good. If he had helped me conquer Beimang, nothing would have happened. As a result, I ended up in my current situation. But it can be seen that my fate is not very good. The head of the piece said treacherously, Your Majesty's fate is not very good. Otherwise, if that woman in Dunhuang City gave birth to a boy, Your Majesty would be able to rest easy. The old woman's face was full of regret, and her eyes gradually turned cold. The old woman who had half the world under her pomegranate skirt said in a low voice, Give the order to Huang Songpu. No later than autumn, the two fronts will go to war at the same time. He, Huang Songpu, will either walk out of the north-resisting city alive or die in battle. The head of the piece was stunned, but he still nodded without questioning. After the head of the piece left, the old woman waited for a long time. Finally, the young palace maid came back. She carefully held an unknown small wild flower in her hands. After the old woman asked everyone to leave her sight, she gently pinned the wild flower into her hair bun. She looked towards the south and thought of an old friend. Suddenly, her face became ferocious. She stretched out her finger and reprimanded, Xu Xiao, you make my life difficult, so I will not let you die in peace. Then she withdrew her hand. Her face suddenly calmed down, and her eyes were gentle. No one heard her whisper. Chapter 1762. Hsu Fengnian followed Hutu City to the east, turning into the mouth of the gorge. He then heard the wind pass through Crouching Bow City, weeping and complaining. After meeting Yang Wenwan, Chen Yunchue, and the other Yuju generals in Xiaoguang City, he entered Tuma Pass on the border. There, in the stone arena where the two Jianghu experts had once sparred, he once again heard the children of the private school playing and laughing together after school. Hsu Fengnian sat on the low yellow mud wall, thinking of Liu Nerong and Wang Dashi of the Fish Dragon Gang, as well as the child Zhao Yusong who lived on this land and had once borrowed a knife from him. He also thought of the little girl with frost-bitten hands by Zhao Yusong's side. He thought of the banquet they had held together, talking and laughing, never forgetting about it. Finally, Hsu Fengnian thought of that little girl who looked like a grass in the countryside. After she entered the golden thread weaving bureau in Lingju, after their meeting on Mount Qingliang, she had saved enough money and paid off that debt of 100 or 200 taels of silver. She then resolutely left Liangju and returned here. Ever since he had first left Beiliang to travel the Jianghu, 6 years had unknowingly passed. He had traveled to many places, gotten to know many people, seen many things, and remembered many names. The pedestrians at Tuma Pass saw a young man dressed in a blue robe and wearing a white jade ornament on his waist. He raised his head and stared blankly at the sky. Yelu Dongchuang had said that as long as they formed an alliance with him and helped him become the emperor of Beimang, half of the southern court would be his tea money. Before long, Jiyu Jiantang had eaten the most expensive bowl of dumplings in the world. And regardless of whether the words were true or false, they were all gambling with the country, all shocking and heroic words. Hsu Fengnian lowered his head to look at the weeds and flowers growing quietly between the cracks of the mud wall. One by one, they were completely unremarkable and not spectacular at all. Hsu Fengnian raised his head to look at the distant bustling marketplace. A white robe appeared beside him. When the white robe descended from the sky, there was not a single speck of dust on the wall. If everything had its vanquisher, then there were only a handful of people in the world who could pose a fatal threat to Hsu Fengnian, a great grandmaster instead of the king of Beiliang. After the death of Cao Changqing, even Tuoba could not be counted as a threat if he could not make rapid progress in martial arts. Only the peach blossom sword god Ng Tai could be counted as half a threat. The reason why it was half a threat was not because Hsu Fengnian could easily defeat Ng Tai, but because Ng Tai was free and unfettered in Jianghu and had no reason to fight Hsu Fengnian to the death. Then the only one left was the person beside him, the only surviving grandmaster of qi training in the world, Tantai Pingjing, the head of the Guanyin sect, who had unwittingly gathered great luck. She stood beside Hsu Fengnian and said to herself, "A wildfire can't burn it out, and it will grow again when the spring breeze blows." But these are plants. Humans were not plants. Moreover, perhaps after some people died, some people would live a life worse than death. No matter how inconspicuous these people were in the midst of the surging waves of war, no matter how insignificant they were in the midst of the drums of war, no matter how insignificant they were in the midst of the war. I once followed my master to the north and south of the Yangtze River. I'm used to seeing life and death, but it doesn't mean that I can treat life and death lightly. Hsu Fengnian was silent. He hung one leg on the wall and bent the other leg. Hsu Fengnian's chin rested on that arm. The breeze blew on his face. He narrowed his eyes and appeared to be at ease. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were cold. Hsu Fengnian, I believe you should also understand that the current situation in the world is already against the rules. If Huang Longsha is taking advantage of the situation, then you are the culprit. Of course, there is also Wudong Li Yufu. If you stop now, it's still not too late. Maybe you can have a good ending. Hsu Fengnian smiled and said, according to Huang Longsha, I, Hsu Fengnian, will die in Beiliang and be infamed in history for 100 years or 1,000 years. Is this your so-called good ending? Tantai Pingjing said indifferently, now they have made concessions. If you continue to push your luck, even if you are invincible in the world, so what? Don't forget that invincible in the world is only invincible in the world. Hsu Fengnian was non-committal. If I remember correctly, you should be grateful to me for your current state of cultivation. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were strange and completely snow-white, like 2 cups full of mercury and 2 snowy worlds. She gently stamped her feet. In a trance, the two of them were above the clouds. She stood in the air with the wind and Hsu Fengnian continued to maintain the same posture. The clouds gathered and dispersed beneath their feet. As they dispersed, they could see ribbons of varying sizes resembling streams and rivers. They were of varying thicknesses, and they flowed slowly on the ground. Hsu Fengnian glanced at it and knew that it was the real world in the eyes of qi trainers. One would not live long because of good people, and one would not die early because of evil people. One person's life and death, and a country's prosperity and decline. Xu Fengnian raised his hand and twirled a weed between his fingers. He said softly, Huang Sanjia once said, reincarnating into this world, even if there are many benefits, it is also a golden millet pillow. Cultivate to immortal, live 1,000 years, and still need a few cups of green wine. How long can a golden millet pillow be? How much wine can a few cups hold? Plus the grass in front of me, they are all very small things. No matter what, I don't want to listen to any great principles now. The greater the principles, the less I want to listen. Chapter 1763. Tantai Pingjing, who had reached the celestial being realm, sneered, Do you really think Jiyu Gentang will help you become the emperor? Tantai Pingjing put her hands behind her back and looked down at the world and the mountains and rivers. She answered her own question, yes, it's true. But no matter who becomes the emperor in the world, he will be able to be the emperor longer than you, Hsu Fengnian. Now Jiyu Gentang, who has reached the realm of Daching and can peek into the mysteries of heaven, has seen this, so he is so kind. Hsu Fengnian said calmly, I guessed it. Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, In fact, you only guessed half of it. Do you think that after Li Yufu cut off the connection between heaven and earth, you will not be bound by the laws of heaven? But have you ever thought that since you and Li Yufu, two ordinary people, can cross the thunder pool, there are not many abandoned pieces in heaven who will perish together with you? For hundreds of years, thousands of years, many outstanding people have achieved immortality. Can you and Li Yufu really escape this disaster? Just when the two celestial beings were talking about the fate of the whole world above the clouds, Beiliang, Liang, Yanji County, Yuju, in the small place called Tuma Pass, there was a beautiful girl with a slender waist and a rather spectacular chest. After learning from the children in the village that the man appeared in the market, she plucked up her courage and trotted all the way there. She wanted to ask him if he could go back to his house to have a simple meal. She stood not far from the yellow wall, sweating profusely. She had to put her hands on her hips and bend down to gasp for breath. She did not see the figure that she did not even dare to miss. She missed him so much. Once she thought of him, she could not forget him. She knew that she and he were from two different worlds. Before she saw him in the Beiliang Palace on Mount Qingliang, she had already accepted her fate. After that, she was even more so. After learning that he appeared in Tuma Pass, she was about to cook for Yu Song. She could have asked Yu Song to invite him, but she did not. She asked Yu Song to wash the rice and choose the vegetables, and then she ran to the Tuma Pass market. Because in this way, he would have to wait for her to cook when he arrived at her house. He could not eat until she finished the meal. She thought that no matter how busy he was, he might agree. He promised to stay not far away from her for a while. That was enough for her. He would not give her more than that, and she would not accept it. The woman named Shu Qing stood in place. She straightened her back and wiped the sweat from her forehead. She smiled in satisfaction, as if she had already seen him. But after she turned and walked away for a few steps, she could not help but look back. She blushed. Tantai Pingjing found that Shu Fengnian's gaze was wandering, and her pair of silver eyes were also moving with uncertainty. Hsu Fengnian retracted his gaze. The world was so big. How could he find him? Although he had used the spies of the Whispering Chamber to find him after he left Jianghu, Beiliang focused on the spies in the capital, Guangling Road, and Jinggan Road. The Whispering Chamber did not have a deep foundation in the southeast. Moreover, there were many mountains in the southeast. It was famous for different sounds and customs. News was blocked. If he wanted to find a needle in a haystack, it would probably take a long time. Moreover, if he was really lucky to find him, he would definitely not want to come to Beiliang. Hsu Fengnian could not go to his hometown now. Even if they met, it would be many years later. Hsu Fengnian hoped that by then, not only would that guy be safe and sound, it would be best if he had a family. Hsu Fengnian had imagined the scene of meeting again after a long separation. Thinking about it, it was not very emotional. Perhaps the two would only raise their palms and give each other a light high five. It should be that simple. Between brothers, there was no need to thank each other. No need to say sorry. In the end, Tantai Pingjing did not make a move. Hsu Fengnian stood up. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It seems that Master Tantai has no intention of putting all your eggs in one basket. Tantai Pingjing's eyes returned to normal. Why should I jump into such an obvious trap? Hsu Fengnian curled his lips and turned his head. Because of her tall stature, they only needed to look at each other at eye level. Hsu Fengnian smiled. That's how it should be. It won't be too late for you to make a move after I and Beimang have a life-and-death battle. Just as Hsu Fengnian was about to fall into the human world, he suddenly stopped. In this kind of battle of fate that has nothing to do with physique, as long as I'm near Beiliang, your chances of winning are not high. Tantai Pingjing raised her eyebrows. You want to ruin my state of mind with just a few words? Hsu Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. Tantai Pingjing disappeared without a trace. Hsu Fengnian stood in the sky and stretched his body. At this time, Hsu Fengnian didn't know if it was because his vision was broadened and his mind was broadened, but he felt a sense of heroism for no reason. He just remembered that when he fought in this life, whether it was a tie or a win, he seemed to be a little aggrieved. He had never really fought to his heart's content. Beimang, wait and see. Let me, Hsu Fengnian, fight 10,000 cavalry alone. Let me fight to the death for the only time in my life without any scruples. Not as the king of Beiliang, but as the great grandmaster of martial arts. Let's fight to our heart's content. Beimang's millions of cavalry want to enter the Central Plains, but they have to go through me, Hsu Fengnian. It was that simple. The figure standing between the sky and the earth, wearing a green robe and a jade pendant, hung a cold blade. Like a green grass. Hsu Fengnian, whose sleeves fluttered like an immortal, didn't know that. It was the heroism that filled his chest. Ancestor Lu, who passed the divine gate but didn't enter, had it. Li Chungang, who floated across the Guangling River with a sword, had it. Cao Changqing, who became the Confucian sage in the West Wall, had it. It was also called the Great Spirit. Chapter 1764. A pair of travel-worn Taoist master and disciple arrived at the estuary of Guangling River. They watched the 15th tide and escorted the dragon carp through the river into the sea. They started their journey back along the river and finally arrived at the border of Liangyu. The two could already see the magnificent scenery of Wudang's 81 peaks. In the evening, the glow of the sunset hung in the western sky. The young Taoist master carried his exhausted young disciple and walked slowly. His steps were steady. The little Taoist who followed his master across half of Liang was sleeping soundly. When they arrived at the foot of Wudang Mountain, the young Taoist master saw an unexpected familiar figure. He wore a green robe and had a sword at his side. He walked forward quickly. Because he was carrying his disciple, he could not bow and greet him. He could only nod his head in greeting. The young man at the foot of the mountain also nodded his head in return. Without any warm words, they climbed the mountain silently. After walking past the 4-character memorial arch written by Lu Zhu himself, Hong Shixiang, or perhaps the reincarnated little Taoist Yu Fu of Lu Dongxian, suddenly opened his eyes. He lay on his master's back sleepily and turned to look at the handsome young man walking side by side with his master. For some reason, the child felt a natural closeness to him but also an involuntary fear. At this moment, the drums of Wudang's peaks sounded at the same time. The melodious sound reverberated between the mountains. Hsu Fengnian, who was in a trance, came back to his senses at the sound of the drums. He turned his head and looked at the little Taoist. Speaking of which, Li Yufu was able to find this Jiangnan village child named Yufu because of Hsu Fengnian's help. It was during that battle against Wang Xianji that Hsu Fengnian had no choice but to go on an out-of-body journey. After that, he vaguely discovered signs of the child's enlightenment. Following the clues, Li Yufu successfully brought the child back to Wudang Mountain. Xu Fengnian looked at the young and tender face. Apart from the child's clear eyes, which were just like the elephant washing pond on Wudang Mountain, and the demeanor of the ox-riding martial granduncle, there seemed to be no other similarities. Xu Fengnian looked at the ignorant little Daoist child, and for a moment, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. Xu Fengnian did not have much impression of the immortal Lu Zhu and the immortal Qi Xuanzhen, but how could he forget that lotus flower peak Daoist priest called Hong Shixiang? HSU Fengnian could not help but reach out his hand and pinched the little Taoist boy's slightly tanned face. Probably because he used too much strength, the child grimaced and did not dare to refuse. He was just a little angry. HSU deliberately said fiercely, "Before you grow up, if you dare to fall in love with someone else, I'll beat you to death." "You!" the little Taoist boy said angrily. "Cultivators are devoted to Taoism and do not talk about love." "What are you talking about?" HSU Fengnian snorted. "Is it your master who taught you this, or the old immortal Chen Yarrow who taught you this *T principle?" The little Taoist boy almost blurted out. He secretly pulled the collar of his master's Taoist robe. Li Yufu said softly, "This is our king of Beiliang. I can't afford to offend him, and neither can your martial granduncle Chen." The little Taoist boy quickly said seriously, "It's the principle that I figured out. It has absolutely nothing to do with martial granduncle Chen." HSU Fengnian and Li Yufu looked at each other and smiled. Then they glanced at the little Taoist boy who was carrying a small bamboo box that was crudely woven. "What's in the bamboo box?" The little Daoist hesitated for a moment, but he still answered honestly, "This little Daoist and Master have traveled thousands of kilometers to the east. Along the way, Master often treated patients. Many of the medicinal herbs were picked by me from the mountains, and the medicine was also brewed by me. There were some patients who insisted on paying Master for his treatment, so Master had no choice but to accept them. He would also give me some copper coins while he was at it, and this little Daoist saved them all up. On the way back, I bought some gifts for Grandmaster Yu and Grandmaster Chen." The little Taoist boy's charcoal-like face made his eyes brighter. Yu Fu was in a good mood because he would soon be able to see the senior Taoist priests on the mountain. He was especially happy when he thought of martial granduncle Yu and the others after receiving his gifts. But the guy in front of him, whose name could be heard even in the southeast coast, made the child's mood fall to the bottom with just one sentence. "Those little things in your box, if I received this kind of worthless gift, I would quickly throw them to the corner." The little Taoist boy's face suddenly became gloomy. He wanted to say something but stopped. He wanted to refute, but he couldn't be righteous, so he simply shut his mouth. HSU Fengnian smiled and said, "Why don't you sell the box to me? I'll give you a few hundred taels of silver. You can go to Escape Summer Town and pick a few valuable things. How about it?" Yu Fu didn't immediately refuse or agree. Instead, he whispered to his master, "Master, what do Martial Granduncle Yu and Martial Granduncle Chen, Martial Uncle Han and Martial Brother Qing Xin like?" Li Yufu didn't help the young king to do evil. He smiled and said, "They all like the gifts you give them." The little Taoist boy said pitifully, "But the things in my box are really worthless." Li Yufu smiled and said, "Valuable things are often only valuable. We are cultivating on the mountain. It doesn't matter whether it's valuable or not." The little Taoist boy quickly smiled and stared at HSU Fengnian. HSU Fengnian also stopped teasing the naive little Taoist boy. He stopped smiling and said to Li Yufu, "Teacher Li, don't you want to think about it? After all, for you, you are different from the ordinary people in the world. Even if you have regrets in this life, you can use them to make up for them in the next life. Once you do that, there is really no way back." Li Yufu smiled and asked, "Isn't the prince the same?" Chapter 1765. HSU Fengnian said helplessly, "But the two of us are still different. You came from the top of the mountain, I came from the bottom of the mountain. In order to achieve my wish, I faced many obstacles, from Wang Xianji to Xie Guanying to Tantai Pingjing. And in the end, I acted out of selfishness. You didn't have to do this. You could achieve immortality peacefully and become a celestial. Moreover, Wudong Mountain has always been an anomaly. As long as you are willing to ascend and accept the enlistment, I believe that the top will give you a big reward. Taking a step back, even if sect leader Li chooses to stay in the world like the Wudong ancestors, there will be a day in the future when a Wudong Taoist priest will take you as a disciple, just like how sect leader Li carried Yu Fu on his back. He will bring you up the mountain to cultivate again and continue to accumulate merit." Yu Fu Li walked up the stairs with his disciple Yu Fu on his back and said slowly, "Since Ancestor Lu set the rules, Wudong Mountain is very similar to Beiliang today. To put it bluntly, it is like a frontier town in the human world. But because there is a bottom line, we have never crossed it. That's why we can barely survive until today. After I came up the mountain, I was ashamed that I cultivated my mind more than my strength. I looked through the handwritten letters of the previous headmasters, read the history books, and even read the Buddhist scriptures. In my spare time, I occasionally went to the big and small lotus peaks to look into the distance. Over time, I had some ideas that I shouldn't have. Hsu Fengnian laughed involuntarily and said, "Today I know that it's not only you and me, Beiliang and Wudong are also in the same boat." Yu Fu Li joked, "Why don't you use the phrase like-minded?" Hsu Fengnian glanced at the little Taoist boy Yu Fu and said softly, "If I'm not wrong, the next headmaster of Wudong Mountain after you should be Han Gui from the Green Mountain Taoist Temple. The Taoist priest who was praised by the old headmaster Wang Zhonglo as righteous and sincere, the further you go. After that, it will be this guy. Wang Zhonglo, Hong Shixiang, you, Han Gui, Yu Fu. In just a few years, I have seen 5 headmasters of Wudong." Li Yu Fu said regretfully, "Unfortunately, I'm afraid I'll only be able to see His Highness, the King of Beiliang." Hsu Fengnian and Li Yu Fu were resting in a pavilion located halfway up the mountain. In the darkness of the night, the lights of the escape summer town at the foot of the mountain were dim. The little Daoist boy Yu Fu had fallen asleep again. Li Yu Fu said softly, "The fate of West Chu that Cao Changqing carried has been scattered to Guangling Taoism. However, the fate of Cao Changqing as the Confucian sage, I can't figure it out." Hsu Fengnian nodded and said, "It was split into 2. One was given to Zhao Zhu, the crown prince of Yang Kai. The other was originally given to Chen Zhibao, but the latter refused for some reason. Thus, it was absorbed by Tantai Pingjing of the Guanyin sect." Li Yu Fu asked curiously, "Compared to Chen Zhibao, Cao Changqing should be closer to you." Hsu Fengnian smiled and said, "Li Chungang lost to Wang Xianji, and Wang Xianji lost to me. Cao Changqing chose Chen Zhibao." At first, outsiders were puzzled. The truth may take a long time to be revealed. Li Yu Fu looked into the distance and said, "The size of Jianghu depends on the fate. Huang Longshe made Jianghu enter an unprecedented year in the past 20 years. Masters came out in large numbers. If it was in the era of Jiao Shulu or Liu Songtao, a Jianghu could accommodate 3 or 4 terrestrial immortals at most. In bad years, there may only be 1 or 2. There were only a dozen martial artists who reached the first grade. I believe that the predecessors couldn't imagine the prosperity of Jianghu in these years. Originally, after the death of Cao Changqing, either someone could quickly become an terrestrial immortal, or many first-grade masters would emerge. I didn't expect that in the end, it was the Qi trainer grandmaster who became a celestial being." Hsu Fengnian smiled and said, "It has always been the modern people who are ashamed to face the ancient people. Now it is the ancient people who are ashamed to see the modern people. It is very interesting." Li Yu Fu suddenly said, "Your Highness, from then on, Mount Wudong will need your care." Hsu Fengnian said with a sad face, "Then won't there be another burden on my shoulders?" Li Yu Fu laughed and said, "When I went down the mountain to travel, I heard an interesting saying. The lice on the rich are double eyelids. The more I think about it, the more reasonable it is. Your Highness has a big family and business, so don't refuse." Shu Fengnian smiled. Then, he felt a bit of sadness in his heart as he looked at this young Daoist who was destined to one day disappear from this life. Hsu Fengnian and Li Yu Fu both knew that the way of heaven was selfless. The so-called good will be rewarded with good and evil will be punished with evil. This was only the beautiful pursuit of the world that was almost wishful thinking. In fact, as long as there were immortals and gods in the clouds, the world could not escape the fate of being a puppet. Hsu Fengnian wanted to cut off the karma for himself. Li Yu Fu wanted to cut off the karma imposed on the world by the celestial being. The battle between the celestial being and the celestial being that the two fought side by side may have been quiet from beginning to end, but it determined the grand pattern of the world for the next 1,000 years. Hsu Fengnian still did not know what Li Yu Fu was really thinking and what he wanted. However, when Shu Fengnian looked at this young Daoist in a plain and clean Daoist robe, his heart was filled with respect. Li Yufu carried his disciple Yufu on his back, and the little Taoist boy carried the small bamboo box. The young leader of Wudang exhaled and said softly, "I want to say something for the world." Hsu Fengnian was puzzled. The young Taoist looked at the peaceful night in the distance and said with a smile, "I hope that in the world after my death, the gentleman will strive for self-improvement and the gentleman will be virtuous. I hope that thousands of years later, whether there is Jianghu or not, there will be chivalrous people who will act righteously." Hsu Fengnian could not help but interrupt, "Is that 2 sentences?" Li Yufu nodded and said with a smile, "Then I will say one more sentence." Hsu Fengnian was silent for a moment. "This can be." The two stood side by side on the mountainside of Wudang. It seemed that 1,000 years had passed. Chapter 1766. In Jianghu, it was a dark and windy night to kill. On the battlefield, it was autumn when the horses were fighting. Fortunately, it was not autumn yet and it was summer. In the temple of the Southern Dynasty in Beimang, there were many basins of ice and it was chilly. An old woman wearing an old yellow dragon robe made in the style of the Southern Tang Dynasty was sitting leisurely on the steps in front of the dragon throne instead of sitting high up on the dragon throne. There were more than 40 people standing in the spacious hall, but it was not crowded. The hall was not divided by civil and military officials. On the right side of the hall were people wearing yellow and purple official robes, no different from the officials who attended the court meeting in Liang. On the left side, most of them were wearing casual clothes, but almost all of them had Xianbei jade belts on their waists. Among them, there was the first person of the old Southern Dynasty, Huang Songpu, who had returned to command military power, Dong Zhuo, who still held the title of King of the Southern Courtyard, Helian Wuwei, who was in charge of the Heshi province, Wang Yong, who was in charge of the Aquarius province, Murong Baoding, who was in charge of the Tangerine province, General Zhong Shentong, Liu Gui, who had lost in the Battle of Liu province in Beiliang, Wang Yong, who was in charge of the Aquarius province, and Wanyan Jinliang, who was in charge of the Longguan aristocracy. Not only were these Beimang generals and heroes gathered, but there was also Beimang's only surviving minister for 3 dynasties, Yelu Hongzai, the leader of the Ruran cavalry, Hong Jingyan, and Crown Prince Yelu Hongzai. In addition, the younger generation had Tuoba Qiyun, who rose to fame in the first battle of Liang Mang, Zhong Tan, who was in charge of the Beimang Boa Hui, King Jingchong, Yelu Dongchuang, and Princess Yelu Meiyu, who was once known as Fan Bainu and had the reputation of being the best player of the Beimang horse drum, and Yelu Yuhu, who had missed the title of Xiajubo, and so on. These people were undoubtedly the most prominent figures in the Northern Court and the Southern Court. At this time, everyone was quietly looking at the old woman who rarely appeared in the Southern Court. It was said that the dragon robe was made by the old Southern Tang weaving family of the remnants of the spring and autumn period. Back then, His Majesty liked its graceful and luxurious appearance, so he specially chose this robe from the 6 patterns of dragon robes, and it had never been changed. Today, after the old woman had gathered everyone in this splendid hall, she was not in a hurry to start the discussion. She just sat on the comfortable steps covered in a beautiful lichen with 9 golden dragons. Next to the old woman's feet was a thin, crystal-clear porcelain basin with a delicate dagger in the ice. The old woman picked up the dagger and casually fiddled with the ice. She said without reason, "I heard that Li Gongda, the Taoist administrator of Beiliang, has a son who has made great military achievements. As a white horse crossbowman, he has been to the gentleman's pavilion." Li Mibi, who had single-handedly created the Beimang spiderweb, said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, there is indeed such a person. His name is Li Hanlin. After he entered the Beiliang frontier army, he participated in more than 20 battles, big and small. In every battle, he always took the lead. Now, he has become a crossbowman lieutenant." The old woman laughed and said, "In only 3 years, he has become a Beiliang crossbowman lieutenant. Isn't it said that in the world, the Beiliang frontier army is the most difficult to be promoted, and the white horse crossbowman is even more difficult to be promoted? Either this young man's father is really powerful, or our Beimang frontier army is too easy to chop off." When the Beimang Empress said this, Dong Zhuo, Liu Gui, and the other people's faces were obviously a little ugly. However, the big shots like Zhong Shentong and Murong Baoding, who were not involved in the war of Liang Mang, were much more relaxed. There was even a subtle smile on their faces. The old woman glanced at Li Mibi, who was standing apart from the others. She seemed to have thought of something and said with a smile, among the 5 great sects of the northern Mang, not to mention the one-man sect Huyan Grand Temple, Dao Virtue Sect, Chess Sword and Music House, Bubing Mountain, and Princess's Tomb, the 4 great sects can be said to be powerful in numbers. Their sword chi is close to yellow and green. The Bronze Man Ancestor, Thirsty, and Small Thoughts are all top masters. Even I have heard of them. In the end, they all died in northern Liang. I also heard in Norland that the Liang Jianghu has always looked down on our northern Mang's Jianghu. They said that each of them would choose 10 masters to fight in pairs. Even the martial arts masters of Liang Jianghu are not worthy of carrying shoes for them. The old woman laughed to herself without a trace of anger. She found Hong Jingyan, who was born blind in the crowd. She raised her head and looked at the leader of the Ruran cavalry, who had a mixed reputation. Hong Jingyan, you were once ranked in the top 10 of the old martial arts evaluation. That demon Luo Yang can be considered your junior in the chess and sword music school. Tell me, can you kill the king of Beiliang, one of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts evaluation? Hong Jingyan cupped his fists expressionlessly and said, I can't kill him. The old woman nodded. Then what if you, Murong Baoding, and Zhong Shentong's younger brother, Zhong Liang, join forces? Hong Jingyan still shook his head and said, I can't kill him. The old woman said, if that's the case, at that young vassal's level, only Tuoba can fight him. What a pity. If not for that little girl from West Chu with the surname Jiang, Li Mibi would have succeeded in the western regions. Hong Jingyan remained silent. In the Battle of Huluku, the entire army, including Yang Yuanzhan, had been wiped out. Only his Ruran cavalry had been lucky enough to avoid 2 of Beiliang's heavy cavalry and break out of the encirclement. Although they had suffered heavy casualties, they had managed to preserve the structure of the Ruran cavalry. They did not fall to the point where they were completely wiped out. However, Hong Jingyan's reputation in Beimang had been greatly damaged because of this. If not for a group of nobles from Beiliang pleading for leniency, the Ruran cavalry would not have continued to bear the surname Hong. Afterwards, Dongzhuo hated Hong Jingyan for avoiding battle to protect himself. He blamed the failure of the Battle of Liang Mang on the Ruran cavalry's desertion of their post. If Hong Jingyan had been willing to delay the Liangju cavalry and wait for the Dong cavalry under his command to reinforce Huluku, even if Yang Yuanzhan's army was unable to escape, they would not have all died at Huluku. The old woman smiled. That lame Shu has only been a master all his life, but he has a very promising son. No wonder he told us many years ago that when his father was drunk, he would always say that Xu Xiao should not be too ambitious after growing up. In the future, his grandson will be twice as big as you, Xu Xiao. Huang Songpu, Liu Gui, and the other old generals who had made outstanding contributions and were loyal and devoted had a strange and embarrassed look on their faces. Meanwhile, the young generals like Tuoba Chiyun and Zhong Tan also had an eye-opening look on their faces. After all, some of the palace rumors that had been circulating in Beimang for many years could not be taken seriously as long as the person involved did not agree to it. The old woman joked, Cao Chongqing died outside Tian City, but other than Hsu Fengnian, there was also the peach blossom sword god Ng Tai. If the 2 of them called for 2 or 3 helpers of similar cultivation levels, such as Sui Xie and Ji Yu, then wouldn't my head be the same as Xu Huainan, the king of the old North Court by the Ruoshure years ago? That kid Hsu Fengnian took my head away just like that. I don't mind telling you that not only did the Qi cultivators of the imperial astronomer of Li Yang die, our Beimang is not much better. Now, those flying land immortals' movements are not easy to grasp. If Hsu Fengnian suddenly appeared outside the main hall today, how would you stop him? The main hall was silent. No one could answer this tricky and heart-wrenching question. The old woman held a dagger and gently broke a piece of ice. She did not make things difficult for these high-ranking Beimang officials. She sighed softly. It is said that a martial artist in Jianghu is no match for 100 people, but a general on the battlefield is a match for 10,000 people. It is also said that a county magistrate can destroy a county governor. It seems that as long as one is an official, whether civil or military, It is more impressive than practicing martial arts. Therefore, I don't understand why Hsu Fengnian left His Royal Highness to wander around Jianghu and then went to Wudong Mountain to practice martial arts. I am even more curious why Lame Shu tolerated his eldest son's unscrupulous behavior. At that time, I only thought that Hsu Fengnian had no choice. He wanted to compete with Chen Zhibao for the military power of the Beiliang cavalry. His military achievements and reputation would definitely be hard to match. He could only think of a way out for himself. Since he could no longer stay in the imperial court, he might as well go to Jianghu and show off while he still had some family background. Looking back, if Hsu Fengnian did not become a martial arts grandmaster because of him, Chen Zhibao would not have left Chuliang and entered Shu. At this point, the old woman fell into a long silence. Dongzhuo quietly sighed. Then, this fat man calmly sized up a young woman out of the corner of his eye. Princess Yelu Yuhu. Back then, if Hsu Fengnian naturally could not bear this great responsibility and Chen Zhibao ultimately replaced him in Beiliang, then perhaps the Great War of Liang Mang would never have happened. Beimang would most likely have chosen Liaodong or Jizhou to invade from the south. The reason was very simple. On one hand, they feared the white-clothed war saint Chen Zhibao's godly ability to command troops. More importantly, Chen Zhibao, through Yelu Yuhu, had secretly conveyed a certain attitude to Beimang. That was, if Beimang started a war outside of Beiliang, whether it was going south from Jizhou to the Central Plains or engaging in a decisive battle with Jiyu Gentang's two Lianing border armies, the Beiliang frontier army would only watch from the sidelines. However, Chen Zhibao only promised that he would watch from the sidelines before Beimang captured Greaton City. He did not make any promises about his future plans. This tacit understanding naturally could not be kept on paper, but Dongzhuo believed that Chen Zhibao truly did have such plans back then. It was not completely absurd to say that it was Hsu Fengnian who had personally dragged Beiliang into the quagmire of war between the two countries. Of course, at the time, all of Beimang did not believe that they would lose. They only believed that even if they captured Beiliang, there was no profit to be gained. In the end, both Beimang and Liang were caught off guard. Now, Beimang was riding a tiger and could not get off. Even the powerful officials of Beimang who had previously insisted on going down the two Liaos to attack Greaton City, no matter how much they rejoiced in their misfortune, did not dare to show the slightest objection. This was because, despite the gentle appearance of the emperor sitting before them, everyone knew that if anyone dared to expose her shortcomings at this time, only death would await them. Chapter 1767. The old woman put away her thoughts and slowly said, "The order of peace will arrive soon." Then, right now, in this large room, pretty much all of Northern Mang's influential figures have gathered. We hope that everyone can speak freely. However, before we discuss the country's affairs, we have a small matter for you all to do. Everyone immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They all put on a respectful posture and listened attentively. The old woman raised the dagger that was stained with some ice shards and pointed at Dongzhuo and Liu Gui. Beiliang scouts wander freely in the Longyang Plains near Hutu City and the northern border of Liuzhu. People say that the White Horse crossbowmen are the best scouts in the world. I don't want to believe that. Dongzhuo, your Crow Pen, and Liu Gui, your Black Fox Pen are the most elite horse pens in Beimang. I hope that before autumn, no matter how many of you die in battle, I don't want to see even a single Beiliang crossbowman. Dongzhuo's face was full of pain. Liu Gui wanted to say something but stopped. The old woman didn't put away the dagger. She sneered and said, 300,000 of our men died outside Beiliang. What's the big deal about 1,000 more deaths? Throw out all the fences of crows and black foxes. The old woman's face became colder and colder. She said sternly, let's not talk about the imperial bulletin of the provincial governors of Liang Imperial Court. We can even get the imperial bulletin of the Jidushi and the administrator. However, the war with Beiliang is imminent, and we can't even get a single useful spy report on the specific deployment of the Beiliang frontier army. Not a single one. What a joke. Liu Gui bowed and said in a deep voice, my Black Fox Pen was willing to die before the war. Dongzhuo had no choice but to agree. Crow's Nest is the same. At this moment, the imperial decree of peace walked into the main hall with a scroll in his hands. Under the instructions of the Empress of Beimang, a huge map of the Liang-Mang confrontation was spread out at the bottom of the stairs. It was more than 10 feet long and wide. It included Hutu City, Huaiyang Pass, Liuya Fueling Grave, and the 3 military towns, as well as Beiju City, which was being rapidly built. The map had a panoramic view of the entire Liangju Pass. As for the passes of the 4 prefectures, it was even more detailed and accurate, down to the county level. Apart from the geography, Beiliang's Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, the left and right cavalry, the Longxiong Army, the 2 heavy cavalry armies, and all the other main forces in the field were also marked in the vicinity of a certain encampment. From the leading general to the approximate number of soldiers and horses, everything was written in red ink. The old woman stood up and casually threw the dagger into the porcelain basin mixed with ice water. She walked down the stairs and lowered her head to look at the huge map. Ever since I ascended the throne, other than appointing the leading generals, I have never made any decisions regarding military affairs. This time, I will make an exception. After she finished speaking, she concentrated on looking down at the map. The imperial decree of peace stood by her side and said calmly, "The second southern expedition will be held at the beginning of autumn. There will be no commander. In order to avoid certain situations, Tuoba has already stepped down from his position as the king of the northern courtyard. He will only lead a personal army." The imperial decree of peace looked calmly at the king of the southern courtyard, Dong Zhuo. The fat man's face was impeccably blank. Beimang's elder, Yelu Hongzai, sneered, "Fatty Dong, playing dumb won't work this time." Dong Zhuo remained blank for a long time under everyone's gazes. In the end, he could not resist the imperial decree of peace's gaze. He first looked with a tearful face at the emperor and found that the old woman remained unmoved. Dong Zhuo quickly returned to his carefree state and said with a smile, "Since our military god is no longer the king of the northern courtyard, I, Dong Zhuo, have no virtue or ability to lead a group of officials alone. I will also not be the king of the southern courtyard." Only after Dong Zhuo had relented did the imperial decree of peace continue. The first line consists of 4 armies, Dong Zhuo, Huang Songpu, Murong Baoding, and Liu Gui. Each of them will have a deputy. They are Hong Jingyan, Zhong Tan, Yelu Dongchuang, and Tuoba Chiyun. It wasn't strange to set up 4 armies, but the idea of a deputy general was worth pondering over. Dong Zhuo and Hong Jingyan had once been rivals in the fight for the king of the southern courtyard. The Dong family's private army and the Ruran cavalry were all top elites of Beimang. It could be said that enemies were bound to meet. Huang Songpu and Zhong Tan, this pair of old and young, were very exciting. There was no need to mention the old general Huang Songpu. In the past, he was nominally the leader of the officials of the Southern Dynasty. He was also one of the 13 generals of Beimang with real power. Zhong Tan had already proven in the first battle of Liang-Mang that a tiger father would not beget a dog son. Although Beimang had suffered a great defeat at the Battle of Huluku, this could not deny Zhong Tan's brilliant achievements in the previous 3 sieges. As the eldest son of General Zhong Shentong, it was already a foregone conclusion that Beimang would have a father-son pair of great generals in the future. As for Murong Baoding and Yelu Dongchuang, just the 2 surnames alone were enough to make people's imaginations run wild. Great General Liu Gui and the head of the 4 great banquets, Tuoba Chiyun, were both leading the same army. This was enough to place high hopes on them. The Taiping decree said in a low voice, "After Dong Zhuo and Murong Bading's armies pass Hutu City and head south, they will be in charge of the battle outside Liangju Pass. Huang Songpu will attack Qingcang City in Liuju and cut off the connection between the Longxiong Army in Liuju and Jibeicheng City in Liangju. They will also need to involve the iron stupas of Chidang and Yuan Nanting's White Feather Light Cavalry. Liu Gui will station his troops outside Huluku in Yuju to prevent the Yuju cavalry from using this place as an exit. During this time, Zhong Tan will pay special attention to the movements of the Beiliang Cavalry General Cao Wei's troops to prevent them from breaking into our Southern Dynasty territory in the area of Linyao Army Town. Dong Zhuo's infantry must take Huaiyang Pass, where the Beiliang Protectorate is located, before winter. Murong Baoding, your mission will be to annihilate the Beiliang cavalry in Liuya, Fueling, and the other military towns. The Taiping decree looked at the 8 generals with different expressions. Perhaps you all want to ask, if He Zhonghu and Zhu Kang's 2 main Beiliang cavalry forces head north, how should we deal with them? The answer is extremely simple. Other than the first line, we have a second line of battle that will coordinate with you. Similarly, there are 4 main armies, Zhong Shentong, Wanyan Jinliang, Helian Wuwei, Wang Yong, each of you will lead an army. When the time comes, you will be stationed in the Longyang Plain north of Hutu City and wait for an opportunity to move. When He Zhonghu's left cavalry forces head north, Zhong Shentong and Wanyan Jinliang will head south. For the same reason, Helian Wuwei and Wang Yong will target Zhu Kang's right cavalry. Without waiting for the people in the hall to raise their objections, the Taiping decree continued, His Highness the Crown Prince and Tuoba will each lead an army as the third line of reinforcements. They will follow the army of the second line of battle and head south. As long as there is an accident on the battlefield outside Liangju Pass, they will definitely rush to the battlefield within a day. This kind of deployment of troops made people dumbfounded. It wasn't too unconventional, nor was it too high up in the air. Instead, it was too straight. It was like a fight between young children. They only knew how to use brute force. Punches and kicks were exchanged back and forth. There were no moves to speak of, so it seemed particularly ordinary. This did not seem like a big move that Beimang's imperial preceptor should have made after racking his brains. Almost any ordinary commander from Beimang's army would be able to make such a deployment. The most important thing was that this kind of deployment revealed an obvious cold-blooded cruelty. It was obvious that they wanted to force the 4 armies on the front line, especially the 2 in the middle, to fight to the death with Beiliang. There was no fancy, no room for maneuver. They were just going all out to exchange troops with the Beiliang frontier army. They would either win a Pyrrhic victory or die. In short, there would be no good ending. Dongzhu's eyes were gloomy, and Murong Bading's face was filled with anger. Deputy General Yelu Dongdao, who had unknowingly become a grasshopper on a string with Murong Baoding, did not look any better. He turned to look at his grandfather, Yelu Hongzai, but the old man only shook his head, indicating for him to calm down. Chapter 1768. Helian Wuwei, Heshi Prefecture's disciplinary magistrate, and Wang Yong, Aquarius Prefecture's disciplinary magistrate, although they were not the main force on the front line, most of them had heavy hearts. Zhong Tan's face was expressionless, while Tuoba Qiyun felt relieved, and then smiled knowingly. Beimang's crown prince, Yelu Hongzai, who rarely showed his face in the imperial court, gave people a feeling of being completely uninvolved. The Taiping magistrate turned a blind eye to the solemn atmosphere in the imperial court. He lowered his head and shifted his line of sight to Liang Prefecture, Jizhou, and the other northern regions. This battle is not only fought north of Beiliang's Beibu city, but also outside of Beiliang. I have a few questions. You are all pillars of Beimang, so why don't you answer my questions? The first question is about Lianghuai Prefecture's Jidushi Cai Nan and Administrator Han Lin's attitude toward Beiliang. Once the battle situation in Beiliang is not favorable, with Cai Nan's troops as the main force, will the Lianghuai border army stand by and watch them die, or will they be willing to take the risk and advance west? For the first time, Helian Wuwei, who had always been taciturn, was the first to speak. Absolutely not. Liang Imperial Court has just conferred Cai Nan with the title of Marquis. No matter what kind of thoughts Cai Nan has towards Beiliang, he certainly won't dare to send troops without authorization. Moreover, Cai Nan is an old general under Jiyu Jiantang. His actions can easily affect the whole situation. He is destined not to implicate Tang Tais Huang and his group of colleagues. The Taiping magistrate nodded and said, "The second question is, after Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan took away the Li family's Yang Castle cavalry, and now the Liang Imperial Court has already left him at Guangling Road to assist Wu Zhongshuan in cleaning up the mess together with Song Li. Under this premise, Liang will most likely send either Lu Shengxiang or Shu Gong to Ji Province. Will their arrival have a decisive impact on the direction of the Huai and Huai border matters? In my view, not only will Lu Shengxiang enter the two rivers, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, Shu Gong, will also arrive at the same time. However, The use of these two people will not be of any benefit to the Battle of Beiliang. Instead, it will be of the same origin as Jiyu Gentang's attack. It is just that Li Yang hopes that our Beimang Iron Cavalry will persist in attacking Beiliang. It will also prevent us from advancing to Great Peace City once Beiliang is defeated. With Cai Nan's army and these two famous generals of Liang personally coming to the north, in addition to Jiyu Gentang's two Liao armies, I believe that only then will the emperor of the Zhao family be truly at ease. Therefore, the arrival of Lu Shengxiang and Xu Gong will not change the situation of the Battle of Beiliang. The Taiping magistrate smiled at this rising star and then asked, "The third question is, previously, Cao Wei of Beiliang's 10,000 cavalry hid in the western regions and attempted to take a long detour to attack the hinterland of our southern dynasty. If it were not for the emergency situation at Qingcang City and having no choice but to surface, it would have been a great disaster. Currently, the young men of Liuzhu and the tens of thousands of monk soldiers of Mount Lantuo are all under Beiliang's command, and Liuzhou's military strength is increasing instead of decreasing. Furthermore, one of the twin jade annulus of West Chu, Ku Jianghuai, is the general of Liuzhu. Both sides and the Longxiong army are in a tripartite balance of power. Do you have any countermeasures?" Zhong Tan said passively, "Naturally, we cannot touch the young men of Liuzhu, but that Mount Lantuo is not impossible to instigate a rebellion. The reason why Mount Lantuo is leaning towards Beiliang is because of the king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian's goodwill towards the Buddhist sects of the world, and also because of that female bodhisattva. We can work on both fronts. If we cannot kill Hsu Fengnian, we can try to assassinate that six-jeweled guru. At the same time, we can also make contact with the other powers of Mount Lantuo. It is true that our Beimang wants to exterminate Buddhism, but there is no harm in making the eminent monk of Mount Lantuo our imperial teacher. However, this will require an imperial decree from your majesty." The Taiping magistrate nodded and said, "The imperial decree has been prepared." Zhong Tan was not surprised. He cupped his fists and said, "This general is willing to personally go to Mount Lantuo in the western regions." After the Taiping magistrate agreed, he said, "Fourth question, once the matter of Huai and the western regions is settled, can we add some firewood to Shujiao?" Li Mixi smiled and said, "That prince surnamed Zhao of Nanzhao, who caused the people under his jurisdiction to complain everywhere, has actually been our Beimang's spy for a long time. In the western Shudao, there is also an important personage who has been carefully instigated by me to rebel, an official with the rank of administrator. If we say that these two people are helping to lead the troops to cross the border to attack Beiliang, then we are overestimating them. It's just that our Beimang is not enough to deal with major matters, but we have more than enough to deal with Liang. When the time comes, we can use them as sacrificial pawns and let the king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian, thoroughly turn into a notorious traitor of Liang. First, the great snow dragon cavalry left the territory of the Prince of Beiliang without permission. Then, there are two people who used the Beiliang banner to rebel. I believe that the intelligent people of Liang will understand, but the common people of the Central Plains will probably believe it to be true. Probably only when the Beiliang frontier army is wiped out and Hsu Fengnian is killed in battle will they suddenly realize that, oh, that guy surnamed Shu actually did not rebel." Wanyan Jinliang snorted disdainfully. Helian Wuwei furrowed his brows. Not to mention the usefulness of this kind of sneaky trick, in the end, it was the same as Li Mix's identity. It could not see the light of day, and it was also difficult for it to be displayed in the halls of elegance. The prefect of peace smiled and said, "The true meaning of this move is not to win the hearts of the people of the Central Plains, but to give the Liang imperial court an excellent reason to righteously and confidently restrict the supply of grain. In the hinterland of the Central Plains of Liang, from the king of Jing and Zhao Zun to the administrator Wen Taiyi to the deputy provincial governor Ma Zhongxian, they have all accumulated grievances with Hsu Fengnian for a long time. I believe that they will be happy to see this happen. Even if Great Peace City eventually convinces the young emperor of the Zhao family to open up the supply of grain, it is still a good thing to slow them down a step and cause the Beiliang frontier army to lose thousands or even tens of thousands of people." The Empress of Beimang, who had been looking down at the map at her feet, suddenly raised her head and asked, "I have a fifth question. That Beiliang claims to have 300,000 cavalry that is the best in the world, and the generals under Hsu Fengnian are said to be enough to make my Beimang and Liang feel ashamed of their inferiority. Then, I would like to ask everyone one thing. Chu Lushan, Yang Wanwan, Yuan Zuozong, Chen Yunshui, Ancestor Ji He Zhonghu, Zhu Kang, and the others. Just Beiliang has so many famous generals of this generation, so many great heads, so why don't my Beimang's million-strong army take them? The old woman suddenly took several steps forward and stepped heavily on the map. She said in a clear voice, I don't need you to answer the fifth question. I have a sixth question. Everyone in the hall, who is willing to open up new territory and be conferred the title of king? Everyone in the hall felt their hearts tremble. The old woman laughed loudly. Listen well. Liang has 30 provinces. In the following battle, those who kill Beiliang's third-grade generals, such as Liangzhou's general Shifu, Lingzhou's general Han Laoshan, Yozhou's general Huang Fuxi, Yozhou's general Yu Luandao, Liuzhou's general Ku Jianghuai, and the others, will all be conferred the title of marquis. Those who kill Beiliang's third-grade civil officials, such as Li Gongda, Song Dongming, Yang Guangdou, Chang Sui, Xu Beiji, and Chen Shiliang will all be conferred the title of marquis. Those who kill Chen Yunshui, Ancestor Ji He Zhonghu, Zhu Kang, and the others will be conferred the title of king. In the future, after annexing Liang, you will have a province in the Central Plains. Those who kill Chu Lushan, Yang Wanwan, Shu Longxiang, and Yuan Zuozong will be conferred the title of king and have 2 provinces in the Central Plains of Liang. The old woman's face was ferocious. In the end, she said, those who kill the king of Beiliang, Hsu Fengnian, they will be conferred the title of king. They will be the king of the South Courtyard, whose territory includes the entire Central Plains. They will be conferred the title of Prince Liang. Other than the 4 provinces in Beiliang, they can also take any province in the Central Plains. The hall was silent. There was no sound. Dongzhuo laughed loudly. His eyes were burning. He cupped his fists and said loudly, Your Majesty, I, Dongzhuo, will gladly accept Chu Lushan's head. Murong Baoding glanced at the map and said with narrowed eyes, Then I will accept the heads of Jin Partridge, Zhu Kang, and the others. Huang Songpu laughed loudly and said, Fortunately, there are still the heads of Shu Longxiang, Ku Jianghuai, Yang Guangdou, and Chen Shiliang in Liuzhu. They are still valuable. The old woman slowly walked forward. Step by step, she entered Beiliang's territory on the map and finally stepped on Mount Qingliang. Before it snows this year, I will let every inch of Beiliang be covered in blood. Chapter 1769. Mount Wudang was flourishing. Many pilgrims spared no effort and traveled thousands of li to Mount Wudang to burn incense. Pilgrims from other places were especially numerous in the capital and Jinggan Road. Many of Mount Wudang's Taoist temples, big and small, provided lodging. Even Xiaozhu Peak, which had just been opened not too long ago, had an endless stream of pilgrims. Wudang's main peak, Zishu Temple and Elephant Cleansing Pond, Little Lotus Peak's persimmon forest and tortoise-carrying tablet, and Yuzhu Peak's huge auspicious murals. These scenic spots were undoubtedly fascinating and unique. However, the Wudang Taoist priest's amiability made the pilgrims feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. Even those with high seniority like Chen Zhao and Yu Xingrui, as well as the Honorable Chief Li Yufu, would always follow the rule set by Ancestor Lu, my mountain Taoist priest, every 10 years, and explain the signs to the pilgrims free of charge. However, the prosperity of Mount Wudang's incense could only be attributed to one person, Hsu Fengnian, who had once cultivated on the mountain. The Elephant Cleansing Pond, which was not far from his cottage, had now become a place of pilgrimage for the people of Jianghu. It had also attracted countless female pilgrims to Mount Wudang because of its reputation. Burning incense was true, as was their admiration for the Northern Shu. That young man was really too legendary. As a vassal with a different surname, he was an extremely high official, and in his hands he controlled Beiliang's 300,000-strong cavalry. As a martial artist, he was ranked among the 4 great grandmasters of Wushu. Moreover, it was said that he was handsome. Word of mouth spread that he was even known as a banished immortal. His style was not inferior to that of West Chu's Cao Changqing. As a result, an extremely interesting scene appeared on Mount Wudang. Unlike other temples and Taoist temples, Mount Wudang had more and more female pilgrims, and most of them were young women who came with their companions. When Hsu Fengnian, Li Yufu, and Yu Fu parted ways in the twilight, the master and disciple continued to climb the mountain towards Mount Wudang, while Hsu Fengnian went to the thatched cottage. Unexpectedly, he was met with a closed door. Looking from a distance, there was clearly a faint light in the house, but when he approached, the light suddenly went out, and then he knocked on the door. Hsu Fengnian was somewhat baffled, and only thought that she was embarrassed and did not have the face to live in the same room with him. This made Hsu Fengnian laugh involuntarily. In fact, when she carried the books up the mountain, the two of them lived together, but it had nothing to do with sharing a bed. He slept on the small bed, and she could only pitifully sleep on the floor in the corner of the room. At that time, His Royal Highness did not have protective feelings for the fairer sex, and the little clay figurine absolutely would not accept his kindness. If Hsu Fengnian really suggested that she sleep on the floor, she would not be able to sleep soundly, and would only think that His Royal Highness had bad intentions. From this, it could be seen that at that time, the little clay figurine of Mount Qingliang was really badly bullied by His Royal Highness. Two thin wooden doors, just like that, blocked the young lord who had even forced his way into the imperial astronomer's house. Hsu Fengnian turned around and saw a small bamboo chair that she had probably forgotten to take back into the house. Hsu Fengnian sat on the chair he had woven himself when he was riding a bull, his hands tucked into his sleeves as he looked up at the bright starry sky. The night sky was as cold as water, but unfortunately, there was no Qing Luo to chase away the fireflies with her little fan. Hsu Fengnian sat alone for a while, but he was really bored, so under the starlight he went to the vegetable garden adjacent to the hut. It was full of lush greenery that had been taken care of by the little mud men. Many wooden shelves had been set up, covered with vines of cucumbers and loofahs, and many small yellow flowers. Hsu Fengnian counted some green peppers, and there were even some round watermelons hidden in the greenery. Hsu Fengnian counted about 5 or 6 of them, all of different sizes. He didn't know if it was because he loved the house and its crow, but Hsu Fengnian always felt that they were very cute. He thought that when they grew up, he would pick them and ice them in the elephant washing pond. They would definitely be delicious, but perhaps he would be reluctant to eat them. Hsu Fengnian returned to the small bamboo chair and sat down, closing his eyes, but not thinking about anything. With a creak, the hut's door gently opened, only opening a small gap. Jiang Genai secretly looked at the back of that figure, feeling a little uneasy. Since she started climbing the mountain alone, she was used to sleeping on the floor. Later, she gathered her courage and spread the bamboo mat on the small bed. These days, she had a good sleep. Previously, when she heard Hsu Fengnian's familiar footsteps, the first thing she did was to jump off the bed barefooted, close the door, and throw the bamboo mat on the floor. She lay on the mat and pretended to sleep, covering her ears and pretending to be dead. This series of actions was done in one breath, very much like a master's style. After waiting for a long time, when he got up and left, she returned to sit down, and then there was nothing else. Instead, Jiang Genai began to feel apprehensive, not because of her conscience, but because she was afraid that the person who liked to hold grudges the most would come to settle the score. She was in a dilemma for a long time before she gathered her courage and opened the door. In the end, she saw that person sitting quietly outside, without any intention to argue with her. Suddenly, a clear voice sounded, and Jiang Genai was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She instantly flew into a rage, feeling distressed and resentful. Hsu Fengnian, you stole my things. Hsu Fengnian, who was chewing on a cucumber, turned his head with an expression that deserved a beating. What's yours is mine. What's yours is mine. How can you say that I stole your things? Jiang Genai stretched out her hand with a straight face, and resolutely said, pay up. Hsu Fengnian seemed to have expected this. I don't have any money on me, so I'll owe you first. Tomorrow, I'll borrow some copper coins from Headmaster Li and the others. How many copper coins do you charge me for a cucumber? 1 copper coin or 2 copper coins? Jiang Genai hesitated for a moment, and confidently said, 2 copper coins. Hsu Fengnian smiled gently, biting on the cucumber, and vaguely said, you don't know how to bid 3 copper coins? Jiang Genai was stunned at first, and then became angry out of humiliation. If you say 2 copper coins, then 2 copper coins. She quickly added, but it can't be the 2 copper coins of the eternal emblem Tongbao, it must be the 2 copper coins of the auspicious talisman Tongbao. HSU Fengnian joked,